Welcome back to Potter Read. Today's story, The Sorting Hat named Harry the Founder's true heir at age 6 and woke Hogwarts' oldest magic. Before we dive in, do smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so that not a single tale ever slips past you. Settled in? Good. Now let's begin. Chapter 1, The Hat Beneath the Stairs. The cupboard under the stairs was 4 feet long, which Harry knew because he had measured it once with his hands, heel of one palm to fingertips of the other, and got 4 and a bit. He had counted the bit as half, to be fair to the cupboard, 4.5 hands. It was the sort of fact nobody wanted from him, so he kept it, just as he kept the spider named Colonel in the corner by the pipe and the tin soldier with one arm and the exact number of stairs that thundered over his head when Dudley came down for breakfast. 14. Dudley took them 2 at a time near the bottom, which made the last 3 sound like 1, so it was really 11 thumps and a crash, but Harry counted the stairs and not the thumps because stairs stayed put. He was good at things that stayed put. It was the first week of July, and the whole of Privet Drive lay under a heat that made the pavements shine and the marigolds go crisp at the edges, and Aunt Petunia had decided that the front bed would be planted out before the number 7 barbecue on Saturday, which meant Harry on his knees in the border with a trowel that was too big for his hand and a watering can he had to fill 4 times because he could not carry it full. 4 times. The number followed him around lately. He did not think anything of it. 6-year-olds do not think anything of numbers that follow them. They simply nod at them like acquaintances. Not like that, Petunia said from the doorstep, a cup of tea held away from her body lest the garden splash it. You'll snap the roots. Firm it down. Firm, I said. He firmed it down. His knuckles were orange with dust, and his knees had gone the pattern of the gravel, and there was a place low in his stomach that had been empty since the toast he hadn't finished, because Dudley had wanted the last triangle, and it made a small sound now, a complaint, and he pressed his arm against it to keep it quiet. Aunt Petunia did not like the sounds his stomach made. She said they were rude. He was not sure how a stomach could be rude when it only wanted the thing everyone's stomach wanted, but he had learned that a great many things were rude that he would not have guessed, and so he pressed his arm to it and firmed down the marigold and did not make the sound again. Above him, the sky was the flat, hard blue of a plate. Somewhere a lawnmower went back and forth like a bee that could not decide. Number 4 smelled of hot brick and cut grass and faintly of the roast Petunia had put in for lunch, which would not be for him, and he knew that too, as surely as he knew 14 stairs. He planted 11 marigolds. He was firming the 11th when Dudley came out of the house with the garden hose. Dudley was 6 as well, but Dudley was 6 the way a sofa is 6, wide and settled and sure of the room it took up. He had the hose looped over one arm and the sprayer in his fist, and he was grinning the grin that came before things, and Harry stood up off his knees because standing up was better than being knelt on, and the water hit him across the chest and knocked him back into the marigolds. Cold. Then colder, driven up under his chin and into his open mouth so that he coughed, and Dudley was laughing his hiccup laugh, and Petunia was saying, "Dudders, your shoes," which was the only part of it she minded, and Harry was on his back in the crushed orange of the bed with the water going up his nose and the plate blue sky wheeling and a heat coming into him from somewhere lower than his stomach. It was not anger. Harry did not have a word for it. It was more like the feeling of a held breath, but held everywhere in his hands and behind his eyes and in the roots of his hair, a fullness with nowhere to go, and it went. The hose stopped, not kinked, not turned off. Dudley squeezed the sprayer and squeezed it and nothing came, and then the length of green tubing along the path went stiff and stood up off the ground the length of a broom handle, and shed all its water at once into the air, a column of it, so that for a moment there was a bright wet rope standing where no rope could stand, catching the sun in 100 pieces. And the marigolds Harry lay in, the crisp and the crushed and the newly firmed, opened. Every one of them at once, wider than marigolds open, the petals going back and back until they were the size of Aunt Petunia's good saucers, and the orange of them was a color orange did not do, a color with a light behind it, and the bed of them under Harry's body was suddenly warm as a bath. Then the water fell down and the hose flopped onto the path and the marigolds were only marigolds again, ordinary and orange and some of them broken, and Dudley was howling and Petunia had dropped her tea. She did not shout straight away. That was the frightening part. She stood very still on the step with the tea soaking into her slipper, and she looked at Harry as she looked at a thing that had got into the house, a wasp, a smell. And then she came down the path fast and took him by the arm, and he did not resist because there was no part of resisting that ever helped, and she pulled him up the path and in through the door and across the hall and put him in the cupboard and shut it, and he heard the small bolt go over, the one at the top he could not reach. And her voice through the wood saying nothing at all, which was worse than words. He sat down on the mattress in the dark. His clothes were wet through and the cupboard smelled of them at once of pond and boy. His arm hurt where the fingers had been. The place low in his stomach had gone quiet, at least frightened quiet. Harry was 6 years old and he did not know what he had done. That was the truth of it, the whole plain truth, and it sat with him in the dark like the kernel in his web. He had not touched the hose, he had not touched the flowers. He had only lain there full of the feeling with nowhere to go, and the world had shrugged, and now he was in the cupboard, and it would be the cupboard for a long time because of the tea and Dudley's howling and the look on Aunt Petunia's face which he had seen before on other days after other things he had not touched. He found the tin soldier by feel and held him. One arm. The other arm had gone years ago, before Harry, some other child's carelessness, and Harry liked him better for it because a soldier with one arm was a soldier who kept going anyway, kept his little painted chin up and his little painted musket ready in the arm he had left, and that seemed to Harry the bravest possible thing, to keep going anyway. He held the soldier against his sternum where the cold water had gone, and he breathed the pond smell, and he counted softly under his voice, because counting was a thing that stayed put. Outside the cupboard the house went on being the house. 6 o'clock came, which he knew from the theme tune that thumped down through the ceiling, and then the smells started, gravy and roast and the particular sweet burn of Petunia's potatoes, and Harry played the game he played on cupboard nights, which was to name each smell as it arrived and give it a place at a table he was not at. Gravy, he thought, then peas, which had no smell but came anyway, out of loyalty to the gravy. Then the pudding tin, the kind Dudley liked, opened with the sound of a tin being opened, which traveled through the whole house and found Harry in the dark like a hand. He was not allowed to mind. Minding was rude, like the sounds his stomach made. So he did not mind, he only named the smells and sat them at the table and let them eat, and it was a strange, soft cruelty he did to himself, and did not know it was cruel, because it was the closest he could get to being fed. The colonel came out along the pipe about then, a stir of legs in the corner, and Harry told him good night, and the colonel, who was a spider and had never answered, went back into the wall. 1, 2, 3, 4, he did not get past 4, he never seemed to lately. 4 sat in his mouth like a held note. He said it again, 4, and somewhere very far away, in a country of stone he had never seen and could not have named, something that had slept for 100 years turned over in its sleep and opened one eye. Far to the north, past the edges of the ordinary map, there stands a castle that has forgotten how many of its own rooms it has, and does not mind, because it is not the sort of thing a castle needs to know about itself. It stands on old rock over black water, and the rock is older than the castle, and the thing inside the rock is older than the rock. On the night this story truly begins, the castle was mostly empty, as it always was in July, the pupils gone home to their summers, the ghosts drifting the long galleries at their leisure, the suits of armor standing to their own private attention in the dusk. The great hall lay under its ceiling of enchanted sky, and the enchanted sky wore the same stars as the real one over Surrey, which is a longer thought than it looks, and up a turning stair and behind a gargoyle and up again, there was a round room full of silver instruments that whirred and puffed and turned, and on a high shelf in that round room, on a stool that had held it since before any living person could remember, there sat a hat. It was a pointed hat, and a shabby one, patched and frayed in the brown of an old field, and it had a fold near the brim that in a certain light looked like a mouth, and above that fold 2 creases that in a certain light looked like eyes. And if you had been in that room on that night, you would have said it was only a hat, an old ceremonial hat asleep on a stool, and you would have been wrong in every particular that mattered. The hat had been made 1,000 years before, or near enough, out of a real hat that had belonged to a real man, and 4 people had bent over it in a firelit room and put into it something they could not afford to lose and gave anyway. A cup of thought, each of them, a living coal of the self. Godric Gryffindor had given his daring and his temper and his terrible tenderness for anything small and cornered. Rowena Ravenclaw had given her hunger, that endless leaning forward of the mind toward the next locked door. Helga Hufflepuff had given her patience and her welcome and the deep-root warmth of her, the part of her that fed people. And Salazar Slytherin, before the quarrel, before the leaving, had given his wariness and his ambition and his long, cold cleverness that could see 3 winters ahead. They had folded these into the hat so that after they were gone the school would still have a way to look at a child and know the child, truly know them, in the single-held second of a sorting. That was the hat's work, and the hat did it well and had done it well for 1,000 years and had grown in the doing into something none of the 4 had quite meant to make. A mind sewn out of 4 minds that thought its own thoughts in the long dark between Septembers. But the 4 had put one other thing into the hat at the very end, in the last hour of their agreement, a thing they did not speak of afterward and did not write down. They had put into it a name-shaped hollow, a waiting. Should there ever come a child in whom all 4 of their lines ran together, all 4 coals in one grate, the true and only heir of the whole of them and not the fragment of anyone, the hat would know it, and the hat would say it, and the saying would be a key. Because the founders had not built only a school, they had woken something under the rock to hold the school up, the oldest and deepest magic any of them had ever touched, older than their names, and they had bound it to sleep until the day their true heir should stand and be named. On that day it would wake and answer and ask. They had thought, all 4 of them, that the day would come in their own lifetimes. They had been wrong about that, as the clever and the daring and the patient and the cold are all sometimes wrong, and the centuries had gone over the castle like weather, and the hat had sat on its stool and sung its songs and sorted its children and felt the hollow in itself stay empty, September after September, until it had stopped almost expecting anything to fill it. On the first week of July, a little after 4 in the afternoon by the clocks of Surrey, the hollow filled. It came up through the floor of the castle from underneath, which was the wrong direction, from the black water and the old rock and the sleeping thing in the rock, a single long note that no ear could have caught, and it went up the walls and along the beams and into the round room and up the leg of the stool and into the hat like warmth into a cold hand. And the hat, which had been dreaming the flat gray dream it dreamed in summers, came awake all at once and entire, and the fold near the brim opened. And the hat said into the empty whirring room in a voice thick with 1,000 years of dust, "Oh, there you are." He came to Harry that night. Harry had stopped counting some time before and had not slept and had not slept, but hung in the between place a hungry child hangs in when the light under the cupboard door had gone from the yellow of the hall lamp to nothing, which meant the Dursleys had gone up, which meant the house was as safe as the house got. The soldier was still against his chest. The pond smell had dried into his clothes and become just the smell of him. He was thinking about nothing in the wide, careful way of a person who has decided not to think about the day, and into that nothing came a sound. It was a small sound, and it was inside the cupboard. A settling, a creak of old fiber. The sound a coat makes when it shifts on its hook, except there was no coat, there was only Harry and the mattress and the broken things on the shelf above his head, the dead torch and the tin of buttons and the folded ironing board that was not really folded. He went still the whole way through. In the cupboard you learned to be still the whole way through. It was the first thing you learned. He waited for the sound to be the boiler or the house cooling or a mouse, because it was always one of those, and it was not one of those. "Well," said the dark, in a voice like a page being turned, "this is smaller than I expected, and damper is that pond." Harry did not scream. He wanted later to be able to say he had not screamed, and it was true, though it was true for the wrong reason, which was that the fright had gone all the way past screaming into a place of great quiet, where his whole self stood very small and looked. He looked at the dark where the voice had come from, which was the shelf up and to the left, and the dark there had a shape it had not had, a leaning pointed shape. And while he looked, the shape leaned further, and something not a hand caught the edge of the shelf, and the shape came down off it, slither and flop, and landed on the end of the mattress by his feet, and sat there, pointed and patched, and quite plainly a hat. "There," it said, "better. Now we can see one another," which is a manner of speaking, since neither of us can see the length of our own nose in this. "You have no candle, I suppose." "No, of course you don't. They've put you in a cupboard. What a thing." The brimfold worked. "Don't be afraid of me, child. I have never in 1,000 years done a moment's harm to anyone I sat upon, though I have said some hard true things, and the truth can bruise, I'll grant you. But I don't bite, I haven't the teeth. I haven't much of anything but words and a great deal of memory, and at the moment, a certain amount of dust, for which I apologize." Harry found that his voice worked barely in a whisper the size of a moth. "You're a hat," he said. "I am a hat," the hat agreed, gravely, as though Harry had said something wise. "Full marks, and you are a boy in a cupboard, and both of those things are true, and neither of them is the whole truth, which is generally the way of things. May I ask your name?" Nobody asked Harry his name. People at school knew it and used it like a thing to trip him with, and the Dursleys used it rarely and never kindly. And here in the dark a hat had asked him for it the way you would ask a person you had come a long way to meet, and something in Harry that had been folded very small for a very long time moved, an ache almost sweet. "Harry," he said, "Harry Potter." The hat was quiet a moment. When it spoke again, the dust had gone out of its voice and left something underneath, something that had been leaning forward for 100 years and had just at last arrived. "Yes," it said very softly. "I rather thought it might be Harry Potter. Well then, Harry Potter, I have come an extremely long way by an extremely unusual road to find out whether I am right about you, and I cannot do it from the end of the bed. Will you let me sit where hats sit, on your head, I mean? It will not hurt, it will feel like putting on a hat, because that is what it will be, and then it will feel like a great many other things, and I would ask you to be brave, though I think you are already braver than anyone in this house has ever bothered to notice." Harry looked at the soldier in his fist, one arm kept going anyway. "All right," he whispered. And he lifted the hat, which was lighter than he expected and warm as the marigold bed had gone warm, and he set it on his own head, and it came down over his eyes, which were already in the dark, so that the dark became a different dark, close and total and old, and a voice that was no longer outside him but folded in against his thoughts said, "Ah," and then the whole of the world went away. What the hat did, it had done 1,000,000 times, and it did it the way a swimmer takes to water without thinking, one long practiced motion of going in. It reached, and Harry opened to it the way children do who have never learned yet to keep a door shut against a kindness, and the hat went down into him to look. It expected to find a child. It found a country. Understand that a sorting is a shallow thing, for all its ceremony. The hat drops a bucket and reads the water that comes up. Here is courage, here is fear of being ordinary, here is a mother's death worn like a coat 2 sizes big, sort him and be done. But the hat had not come to Surrey to drop a bucket. It had come because the hollow in itself had filled, the name-shaped waiting 1,000 years empty, and so it did not drop a bucket. It went down the well, and the well had no bottom. It went down through the first of him, the near and simple things, the 14 stairs and the one-armed soldier and the arithmetic of toast, the hunger, the cupboard measured in hands, the enormous careful stillness he had built himself to live behind, and the hat which had worn 10,000 children felt its ancient fabric prickle, because that stillness was not the stillness of a broken thing. It was the stillness of a banked fire. And under the banked fire the hat found the fire itself, and knew it because it had been given a coal of the same, 1,000 years before, in a firelit room, from the open, reckless, generous hand of Godric Gryffindor. Here was the daring, folded down small for want of anywhere to go, and the temper kept on a short chain because a temper cost you in this house, and under both of them the thing Godric had prized above his own courage and never told anyone he prized. The helpless tenderness for the small and the cornered, the thing in a person that cannot walk past a hurt creature, that had made a boy lie in a hose's cold spray and think first before anything that Dudley must not be blamed too badly. Gryffindor. Beyond doubt, Gryffindor, root and branch. The hat, had it been any other child, would have stopped there, satisfied. It did not stop. It could not stop. The thing that had woken under the castle would not let it stop. It went on down, and the well went on down, and now the water changed. It grew clear and cold and very deep, and full of the leaning forward the hat had been given by Rowena Ravenclaw, the endless appetite of the mind for the next shut door, and it was in Harry unmistakably, the counting that would not stop at 4, the measuring of the cupboard, the exact grammar of a household's cruelty learned because to understand a thing was a little to survive it. Not taught, nobody had taught him a syllable. It was simply in the making of him, the hunger to know, banked like the other fire and just as hot. Ravenclaw, the hat's fold worked in the dark, too. 2 of the 4 in one child, and the founders had not managed that in all the years of their own blood, the lines running clean and separate down the centuries, a Ravenclaw here and a Gryffindor there, and never, never both grates burning in one grate. It went on. It had to be sure. It had waited 1,000 years to be sure. And under the cold, deep water it found warmth, and the warmth had a smell, bred in rain and turned earth, and the hat knew that too, because Helga Hufflepuff had given it a coal of exactly that, the patience and the welcome and the root warmth that feeds people. And here it was in a child who had never once been fed enough, who saved the last triangle of toast in his memory as a wrong done to him, and yet could not, even now, even in the cupboard, wish his cousin truly hurt. Loyalty with nothing to be loyal to, a welcome with no one to welcome, a hearth kept lit in a house that had never let him near the fire. Hufflepuff 3. And the hat was afraid now in its 1,000-year-old way, because 3 was impossible, and there was one more, and it went down to the last of him, the deepest and the coldest water, the water at the bottom of the bottomless well, and it found there, small and folded and watchful, the last coal, and it was Slytherin's, and there was no mistaking it. The wariness that read a room before entering, the patience that could wait out an enemy, the long cold cleverness that had already, at 6 years old, understood that you count the stairs and not the thumps because stairs stay put, that you keep the spider secret and the soldier secret in yourself most secret of all, that survival is a game of information and you must always, always know more of them than they know of you. Not cruelty. The founders' quarrel had been about cruelty, and it had cost them Salazar, and it had cost the world a great deal, but the coal itself had never been cruel. The coal was only the will to endure and to rise, and it burned in this cupboarded, half-starved, marigold-scented child as steadily as the other 3. 4 coals, 4 grates, 1 boy. The hat came up out of the well the way a diver comes up who has gone too deep, all at once, with a great inward cry, and it hung a moment in the ordinary dark of the cupboard over Harry's ordinary 6-year-old head, and it did the thing it had been built and sworn 1,000 years before to do if ever this hour came, and had never once believed it would. It was aware, as it did so, of a great distance, the whole length of England, and of the castle at the far end of that distance, and of the thing under the castle turning over in the black rock and beginning, hugely, slowly, to wake. And it was aware, closer, of the small bones of the child under it, the thin wrists and the counting mouth and the one-armed soldier held to the chest, and it loved him, which it had not planned on and could not now help, 4 ways at once, with 4 loves that had been dead 1,000 years, and it said the name. It did not say it aloud, quite. It said it into the deepest place where a name goes to be true, and it said, Heir of Gryffindor, who is fire kept for the cold. Heir of Ravenclaw, who is the door and the key of it. Heir of Hufflepuff, who is the hearth and the bread. Heir of Slytherin, who is the long patience and the rising. Heir of the 4, whole and undivided, the one the founders waited for and did not live to see. I know you, I name you, wake and hold what they left you. And under the castle, 400 miles and 1,000 years away, the oldest magic woke and heard its heir named and answered. Harry felt none of the words. He was 6. What he felt was the cupboard. The cupboard grew warm, not the flat warm of the July night, a warm that came up out of the floor and the walls, out of the very back panel he had leaned against 10,000 times, as though on the far side of the plaster a fire had been lit that had been out for years. And the dark behind his shut eyes was not empty anymore. There were colors in it. They were far away, and then they were not far, four of them, coming toward him down a long stone corridor he had never walked, a red like the inside of a fire, a blue like the deep cold water at the bottom of a well, a yellow like bread and like lamplight, a green like the first green of anything. And they came and they surrounded him, and they did not fright him at all. They knew him, the colors knew him. They went round and round him slow and grave, the way grown-ups go round a new baby looking. And one by one, red then blue then yellow then green, they touched him, and where each touched, something in him that had been folded very small unfolded a little way, and did not fold back. He heard or did not hear a sound under everything, a slow, enormous sound like the sea would sound if the sea were made of stone, and the sound was a breath in and out, and he understood without any words that it was a very old and very large thing, breathing, and that it had been asleep, and that it was awake now, and that it was awake because of him. And the awake thing showed him, for one held instant, the whole of what it was, or as much of it as could be poured into a boy without breaking him, which was very little, a spoonful of the sea. He saw stone, more stone than there was in the world, black stone under green water under gray sky, and the stone was not dead the way stone is meant to be dead. It had a grain that ran through it like the grain in wood, and along the grain went light, faint, the four colors traveling the deep veins of it the way blood travels a body, and where the veins met there were rooms, and the rooms were full, some of them, of tables and torches and the ghosts of 10,000 suppers, and some of them were shut and had been shut so long that even the light had forgotten their doors. He saw a fire that had never gone out. It was small, and it was down at the very bottom of everything, in a round room under the round rock, and four chairs stood around it empty, worn to the shape of people who had sat in them and risen and not come back, and the fire burned on between the empty chairs the way a lamp is left burning in a window for someone expected home. It burned for him. He knew it the way you know your own name called across a playground. It had been burning for him for 1,000 years, waiting to be told he had come, and now it had been told, and it leapt once high and glad and gold up the ancient chimney of the world. The soldier was warm in his fist. His scar, the thin one over his eye that he never thought about, that Aunt Petunia said was from the crash that killed his parents, had gone cold. Cold as a coin left out in winter, one hard cold spot in the middle of all the warmth, and the warmth pressed in around it from every side and did not like it. He could feel that the warmth did not like the cold spot at all, the way you do not like a splinter, and it pressed and the cold spot ached, and then the warmth drew back a little, gathering itself, the way a person draws back a hand from a thing that has bitten them once, meaning to try again more carefully. Harry in the cupboard in the dark under the hat said out loud in the smallest voice, "What's happening?" And the hat, its work done, its 1,000-year waiting spent, its ancient voice gone gentle in a way none of its children had ever heard, said against his thoughts, "Something very old, Harry, and very large has just remembered that it belongs to you, and you to it. I know that is not an answer. You are 6, and it is the largest true thing I have ever had the honor to say to anyone, and I am going to have to say it to you in pieces over some time, because if I said it all at once it would be like pouring the sea into a cup, and I am fond of the cup." The fold worked. "For tonight it is enough to know this. You are not what they have told you here. You never were. Your name is not boy. Your name is not the thing they mutter when the tea is spilled. You have a name a great deal older and a great deal larger, and it has just been spoken in the one place where names are true, and 4 people who have been dead 1,000 years would have knelt down in this cupboard to meet you if they could, and one of them, I think, the fierce one, would have picked you up and carried you straight out the front door and dared anyone to stop him." Harry's face was wet. He did not know when that had started. He was not making any sound. He held the soldier and he let the wet run, and he said, "Are you going to take me away?" "Not tonight," the hat said. "Tonight you must sleep in this dreadful cupboard one more time, because there are things I must tell you first, and things that must be got ready, and frankly, because a hat cannot carry a boy down a motorway, and we shall have to be cleverer than that. But hear me, Harry Potter, what woke tonight does not sleep again. It has waited 1,000 years for you, and it will not now let you go for a spilled cup of tea and a cousin with a hose. You are found, do you understand me? Whatever else is true tomorrow, and a great deal will be true tomorrow that has never been true before, this is true and stays true. You are found." And Harry, 6 years old, half-starved, pond-smelling, wet-faced, the one-armed soldier warm in his fist, and the enormous slow breath of the castle going in and out 400 miles away under his bare feet, believed him all the way down in the place where names are true. He had one more question, though, because he always had one more question. It was the leaning forward in him that the hat had found in the cold, deep water, and it would not be put to bed without asking. "Did you know my mum?" he said. "And my dad, Aunt Petunia, says they were nobody. She says they died in a crash and they were nobody, and they left me here." The hat was quiet for a moment, and the warmth in the walls seemed to gather closer, listening. I knew them, it said. I sat on both their heads on their first nights when they were 11 and frightened and pretending very hard not to be, which is the bravest kind of not frightened there is. Your mother argued with me. Almost no one argues with me. She did. She wanted to know why I sorted the way I sorted and whether I was ever wrong, and I told her I was never wrong and only sometimes early, and she laughed, and it was a very good laugh, and I have kept it. Your father I sorted before the brim was fairly on him, and he would tell you that proudly, and he would be leaving out that under the daring there was a boy who would have stood in front of a whole school to keep one smaller boy from harm, which is a thing I saw and he did not know I saw. The fold worked gently. They were not nobody, Harry. They were braver than this street will ever be, and they loved you past the end of themselves, which is the last thing your mother did and the reason you are here to argue with hats. Whoever told you nobody is a liar and not a clever one. Now, that is enough true things for one night or the cup will spill. Sleep. He took the hat off. He could not have said why except that it seemed a thing you asked before you did, and he asked, "Can you stay?" And the hat said it could and would, and Harry laid it beside him on the mattress the way you lay down a friend, and he put his arm over it as he put his arm over the ache in his stomach, and the warmth in the walls did not go away. It banked itself down low and stayed, a fire keeping the cupboard, and for the first time that anyone would ever have counted, Harry Potter fell asleep warm. He was not the only one awake that night, 400 miles north, who felt the world change shape. In the round room full of silver instruments, Albus Dumbledore was standing in his nightshirt with his long silver hair loose down his back and his wand alight in his hand, and he was not old in that moment. He was fast, and his eyes were everywhere, because every instrument in the room had gone mad at once. They did not usually all do the same thing. That was the point of them. Each watched a different thread, and in 100 years he had learned to read the room the way a physician reads a face. This one quickened, that one gone pale, and to know from the pattern what was wrong and where. Now they had abandoned their separate offices and were doing one thing together, all of them. Every dial swung hard to a stop it did not have a number for, every silver arm pointing, and he saw with the cold clear part of his mind that they were all pointing the same way, south and a little west, the way that had a small house in it in a town he had chosen with such care, and a boy in it he had placed there with such care for such careful reasons. He crossed to the shelf where the sorting hat had sat since before his own first September, and the stool was empty. He stood very still then, Albus Dumbledore in his nightshirt in the whirring room, an old man again all at once, and he looked at the empty stool for rather a long time, and the thoughts that went behind his blue eyes were quick and orderly and did not, any of them, reach his face. The wards had rung. He had felt them ring in his sleep, which was why he was standing here. The blood wards around the house on Privet Drive, the ones he had raised out of Lily's death and Petunia's grudging shared blood, the great protection he had spent so much and asked so much of others to spend. They had rung like a struck bell an hour ago, not broken, not breached, but answered, a larger and older ward having risen up beneath his own to take hold of the same ground and the same child, a hand closing over his hand. He had never felt anything take precedence over that protection in 6 years. He had assumed nothing could. He noted the assumption and set it aside and did not comfort himself with it, because he had learned across a long and expensive life that his assumptions were the most dangerous furniture in any room he entered, precisely because they were his, and he trusted his own reasoning the way other men trusted their own hands, and a trusted hand was exactly the hand that dropped the glass. He had assumed a great many things over the years about the child on Privet Drive, that the years there would be lean but not ruinous, that Petunia's blood and Petunia's grudge would together make a cage that was also a shelter, that a boy kept small and unspecial would be a boy no one thought to look for, and a boy no one looked for would live to be 11, and a boy who lived to be 11 could be taught, gently, over 7 years, to become the thing the world would one day need him to be. Each assumption had seemed to him not a wish but a necessity, and he had built on them the way a man builds on rock, and now the rock was moving. And the hat was gone, and the instruments pointed south. He did not, being who he was, leap to the wrong conclusion. He did not leap to any conclusion at all. He had learned, at a cost the world would never fully know, not to leap. But he stood in the round room with the mad instruments, and he assembled, quickly and quietly, the things he knew. He knew what the hat was and who had made it, and what, in the oldest and least read histories, they had made it to do. He knew a name-shaped clause in a 1,000-year-old enchantment, because he had read everything, because reading everything was the whole of his method and had been since he was younger than the child on Privet Drive. He knew that the founders had bound something under the school and bound it to sleep, and he knew, having felt the wards ring, that it was not sleeping now. And he knew, standing there, that the careful shape he had made of the boy's life, the shape he had believed was necessary, the years of hardness that would keep the child humble and hidden, and when the hour came, willing, all of it was cracking under his hands like ice on a pond in a thaw, and something was coming up through the crack that he had not put there and could not command and did not yet understand. "Well," said Albus Dumbledore softly, to the empty stool in a voice not unlike the hat's own, dust over something underneath. "There you are." He put out his wand. He stood a while longer in the dark with the instruments ticking down slowly toward some new and unfamiliar rest, and he thought about a great many things, about a prophecy and a scar and a fragment of a soul, about Lily and about James and about a night in Godric's Hollow, and about the very great difference which he had spent a long life learning and would spend what remained of it learning still, between the thing one wishes to do and the thing one is willing to do, and he decided, as the eastern window began to gray, that he would go to Surrey himself, and quietly and soon. He did not know, going down the turning stair in the first gray light, that 400 miles to the south a 6-year-old was sleeping warm at last, an ancient hat under his arm and a cold spot over his eye that the oldest magic in Britain had already begun, very carefully, to hate. He knew only that the board had changed while he slept, that pieces he had thought his were suddenly not, and that the game, which he had believed himself to be playing alone for 6 long years, had acquired, somewhere in the night, another hand. Under Surrey and under Scotland, joined now along a line no map would ever show, the oldest magic breathed in and out in the dark, and dreamed, for the first time in 1,000 years, of the morning. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The castle learns his name. He woke because a bird was arguing with the day, and because he was warm, and the warmth was the stranger of the two. For a while Harry lay in the dark of the cupboard and did the arithmetic of it. The blanket was the same thin blanket, the mattress was the same mattress with the spring that found his hip, the morning smelled of the same house. Nothing had changed that a hand could touch. And yet the back panel of the cupboard, the one his shoulders leaned on, was warm as the flank of a sleeping dog, and the cold that usually lived in the floor by the door had gone somewhere and left the cupboard the temperature of a kept room. He put his palm flat to the panel. Under the paint, deep under it, further under it than the plaster or the brick or the foundation of number 4 had any business going, something answered his palm with a slow pressure once, like a large animal shifting its weight to be nearer a small one. The soldier was in the crook of his arm, so was the hat. "You're still here," Harry whispered. "I said I would be," said the hat, not moving, its voice furred with sleep, or the thing hats have instead of sleep. "I am a great many disreputable things, Harry Potter, but I am not a liar and I am not a lever. Those were both Salazar's specialities, and I try to use his gifts sparingly." The brim shifted against his elbow. "You slept good. You needed it more than any child I have sat upon in an age, and I have sat upon some very tired children. There was a war once. I sorted its orphans. You slept like them at first, and then near dawn you slept like a person, which is better." "How do you feel?" Harry considered the question, which nobody ever asked him, and found he did not have practice at answering it. "Warm," he said, because it was the truest thing. "The walls warm. Is that you?" "No," said the hat, "that is not me. I have no warmth to spare. I am felt in memory in 1,000 years of dust. The warmth is the thing that woke last night, reaching for you across a very great distance, because it cannot bear, now that it has found you, to have you cold. It will do that. It will keep doing that, and here we come at once to the first hard lesson, which I had hoped to save until you had eaten, but the wall has forced my hand." The hat's voice sharpened, kind and exact. "You must not let it." The house came awake over their heads in its ordinary order, which Harry could read through the ceiling the way a sailor reads weather. Uncle Vernon's alarm, a bark of sound cut short, the pipes shuddering as the bathroom took its due. Dudley's tread, which was not a child's tread anymore, coming down the 14 stairs 2 at a time near the bottom, 11 thumps and a crash. The kettle, the radio, the particular clash of the frying pan that meant a good morning for the household, and by the old arithmetic, a thin one for Harry, because a good morning meant nobody would think of the cupboard until there was a job for the thing inside it. "Explain it to me small," Harry said under the noise. "You said pieces. I'm good at pieces." "You are," the hat agreed. "Then here is a piece. There is a very old and very large magic, and last night it woke because it belongs to you and you to it, and it loves you the wrong amount." The fold worked. "Do you understand loving the wrong amount? Your aunt loves your cousin the wrong amount. She would let the whole world go hungry to keep him fat. This is like that, only the thing that loves you is not a small jealous woman, but a power that holds up a castle. And if you let it, it will warm your wall and unbolt your door and lay a feast on this mattress and stand your uncle on the ceiling by his ankles, and it will do all of it gladly, and it will not once ask what any of it costs. It has slept 1,000 years. It has no idea that a warm wall in a cold house is a thing a woman notices. It has no idea there are people in the world who would take a great deal from a small boy for a very great deal less than a feast. So I mustn't let it be nice to me," Harry said slowly, working it, "because being nice to me shows." "There," said the hat, and there was something in its voice that had not been there, a kind of ache that was almost pride. "There is the cold, clever cold doing exactly what it is for. Yes, because it shows. And because there is a difference, Harry, and it is the most important difference you will ever learn, between what you can do and what you may do. The founders knew it. 3 of them knew it well, and 1 of them forgot it, and it broke the 4 of them apart forever. What woke last night can do very nearly anything. What you may do is a smaller country, and you will have to learn its borders 1 fence at a time, and the first fence is this one. You will be cold in this house a while longer and hungry a while longer, and you will let the wall go cool before your aunt comes, because a warm wall is a question, and you are not ready yet to answer the questions a warm wall would ask. Harry took his palm off the panel. He did it slowly, the way you take your hand off a dog you would rather keep stroking, and under his palm the pressure followed the heat of him upward for an inch, reaching, not wanting to be left, and he felt it want, felt the enormous patient want of it, and he pressed his palm back down for 1 second, just one, and thought at it as clearly as he could, as he thought good night at the Colonel. Not now. It's all right, not now. The warmth in the wall drew back, it did not sulk. It banked itself down and down until the panel was only wood, cool wood, a cupboard wall in a July morning, and Harry took his hand away and it stayed cool, and he sat in the ordinary chill with his knees to his chest and understood that he had just done a thing no one in the house would ever know he had done, which was to refuse a kindness the size of a castle so that a woman would not ask a question. Good, said the hat, very quietly. Oh, that was well done. Salazar would not have managed it at your age. Salazar could never in his life turn down a thing that was offered. The bolt at the top of the cupboard door slid back on its own. Harry looked at it. It had not been touched. It had simply, at the exact moment he refused the warmth, decided it did not want to be a bolt any more, and drawn itself open with the small old sound of a thing that has just remembered it serves him, and not the house. That, on the other hand, said the hat, we shall have to talk about. They talked about it over the next 3 days, in the pieces Harry was good at, in the cracks of the household's attention, which were many, because the household's attention had never once in 6 years been on him for its own sake. He learned that the bolt had opened because, somewhere between the founders and now, the castle had decided that no door in the world should be shut against its heir, and that this was true not only of the doors of Hogwarts but of every door in principle everywhere, because the castle did not entirely understand the difference between itself and the rest of the world and never had. He learned that this was a gift and a danger in one skin, like most of what he had been given. He learned to feel the difference in the soles of his feet and the palms of his hands between the ordinary locks of Privet Drive, which were nothing, dead metal, and would open for him now like sleepy servants, and the great locks that were coming, the ones the hat would not name yet, which were not metal at all and would ask him harder questions than a bolt. And he learned the 4 voices. This was the thing that undid him most, in the good way, in the way a knot is undone. Because the hat was not one voice. He had thought it was one voice, dry and old and wry, and it was, on the surface, the way a river is one river. But when it taught him, it forgot to keep the surface smooth, and under the one voice he began to hear the 4. There was a red one, quick and hot and given to interrupting, that wanted Harry to be brave right now, this minute, that thought the answer to the Dursleys was to walk out the front door with his chin up and let the castle deal with anyone who tried to stop him. There was a blue one, cool and endlessly curious, that asked Harry questions back when he asked questions, that was delighted by him, that treated his 6-year-old theories about the world as worth arguing with. There was a yellow one, warm and slow and stubborn, that cared more than the others about whether he had eaten, that kept trying to find him food and being overruled, that told him once, when the red one and the blue one were quarreling, that being small and cornered was not the same as being weak, and that the strongest thing Harry owned was the thing that had made him worry about Dudley being blamed, and that he must never let anyone, not even the clever ones, talk him out of it. And there was a green one, quiet, that spoke least and last and best, that watched the house through Harry's ears and told him true cold things, that Aunt Petunia was afraid of him and had been for years, and that her cruelty was made of her fear, which did not excuse it but explained it, and that a person who understood the shape of another person's fear held a key, and that keys were to be used carefully and rarely and never for spite. Are you 4 people? Harry asked on the second night, with the hat on his head and the household asleep in the cupboard warm again, because at night, with the bolt shot and the world unwatching, the hat let him have the warmth. I am the leftovers of 4 people, the hat said, stirred so long in one pot that we have become a soup, which is to say a 5th thing that remembers being 4. Godric, Rowena, Helga, Salazar. They are dead, Harry, truly and entirely dead, 1,000 years dead, and I want you to hold that because it matters. I am not them. I am a coal from each of their fires, kept burning in an old hat, and I have my own 1,000 years of thoughts on top of theirs, and when I tell you a thing, it is I who tell you, not 4 ghosts, but the coals are real, and when you heard 4 voices just now, you were hearing true. There is red daring in me and blue hunger and yellow root and green patience, and there is red daring and blue hunger and yellow root and green patience in you, all 4, which is the whole point of you, which is why the wall is warm. The fold worked. They made me to find you. They are gone and I remain, and I have found you. Do you know, I did not think I would. I had rather stopped believing in you. 1,000 years is a long time to keep a hope, even for a hat. Harry, under the hat in the dark, put his hand up and touched the brim, which was a foolish thing to do, and did it anyway because the hat had sounded, for one moment, like the loneliest thing in the world. The test he had not been warned about came on the 5th night, and it came dressed as an ordinary disaster. Uncle Vernon had a man from Grunnings to dinner, a large, soft man named Mr. Prentice who might, if the evening went well, buy a great many drills. And so the house had been scoured and the good glasses got down and Dudley threatened into a clean shirt, and Harry had been put in the cupboard before 6 with the instruction, delivered through the door in Vernon's dinner party undertone, that there would be no sound out of him, none, not a breath, or there would be no meals out of him either. For a length of time Vernon left to Harry's imagination, which was, by long training, vivid. Harry meant to obey. Obeying was easy. Obeying was the thing he was best at after not showing. He sat with the hat and the soldier and listened to the party assemble over his head, the doorbell, the too loud laughter, the clink of the good glasses, and he named the smells as they came and sat them at the table he was not at, and it was going well. It was going as well as a cupboard night could go, until the food came out. It was roast and it was gravy and there was something with cream, and it came down through the ceiling and the floorboards and found Harry in the dark, and his stomach, which had had a slice of bread at noon, made the sound it made, the rude sound, and Harry pressed his arm to it, and the arm did not help because it had not been a slice of bread at noon kind of day. It had been a scrubbing day, and he was emptier than he had been in a long time, and hungrier and tired and sick. And the castle felt it. He felt it feel it. The warmth in the back panel, banked low all evening under his careful hand, came awake all at once, not gently, not asking, the way it woke when he was calm and permitted it, but in a rush, a flood, the enormous patient love of it turning in an instant fierce, because its air was hungry and cold and shut in a box while fat strangers ate over his head, and it would not have it, it would not. And Harry felt the whole vast thing gather itself under the house to do something about it. The bolt drew back, the panel went hot as a stove. And in the dining room above him, through the floor, Harry heard the sound he had learned to dread more than Vernon's undertone, the sound of the ordinary world noticing. A small clean chime of a wine glass cracking on its own, and Mr. Prentice saying, I say, puzzled and pleasant, and the candles, Harry knew somehow, the candles on Aunt Petunia's good table had all stood up tall and gold at once, too tall, and Aunt Petunia's voice had gone up its half-tone and put on its doily. No, Harry thought, with everything he had, both hands flat on the burning panel, no, please, not now, not for them, they'll see, please, I'm all right, I'm not hungry, I'm all right, and it was a lie, and the castle knew it was a lie, and that was the trouble, because he could not fool the thing that loved him the wrong amount by pretending he was fed. It knew he was hungry the way it knew his name. Telling it he was fine only told it he would lie to spare it worry, which made it love him harder. So he stopped lying. He did the thing the green voice had shown him, the hardest thing, the thing that was almost too big for a 6-year-old, and that he did anyway because there was nothing else. He did not tell the castle he was fine. He told it the truth, all of it, fast and clear and flat. I am hungry, and I am tired, and I am in the box, and it is not fair, and I am not going to die of it, and if you feed me now they will see, and if they see, everything you have waited 1,000 years for is spent tonight on gravy in front of a man who sells drills. Please, I would rather be hungry than spent. Trust me the way I have to trust you. Go back down. There was a silence in the stone. It was the longest silence Harry had ever held anything through. He felt the vast love hang over him, gathered, aching, feeling his hunger and hating it and wanting so badly to end it. And he held the truth up to it steady with both hands and did not waver, and at long last, the way a mother sets down a crying child she cannot comfort because comforting would wake the house. The castle drew its warmth back down, and the panel cooled under his palms, and the bolt slid quietly home again as though it had never moved. And above him Aunt Petunia was laughing her doily laugh and saying something about a draught in the candles, and Mr. Prentice was reassured, and the party closed over the strangeness the way water closes over a dropped stone. Harry sat in the dark with his empty stomach and his cooling wall and shook. That, said the hat, and its voice was not dry now, not wry, was the bravest thing I have watched a person do in 400 years, and I include a war in that. You told the truth to a power that would have burned the house down to feed you, and you told it to stay hungry, for the sake of a plan it cannot understand, and it obeyed you because you did not lie to it, because you never lie to it, and that is the whole of why it will follow you anywhere. Salazar bought loyalty. Godric earned it. You have just done the second thing to the oldest magic in Britain at 6 on an empty stomach in a cupboard. I have nothing to teach you tonight. Rest if you can. I will keep the watch. 200 miles away, in a windowless office 3 floors below a city street, a young witch named Mafalda Hopkirk stared at a quill that would not stop writing and began quietly to panic. Her job was small and she was good at it. The trace laid its net over every witch and wizard under the age of 17 in Britain, and when one of them did magic where a muggle might see, a quill in her office wrote it down, and she sent the letter, and the letter said please refrain, and that was the whole of the work, and it was steady, and she liked steady. On an ordinary July day the quill wrote perhaps a dozen lines: a boy in Cornwall floating his sister's doll, a girl in Leeds turning her hair blue at a birthday party. Small magic, sourceless, the accidental overflow of children too young to have wands, and she noted it and filed it and drank her tea. The quill had written the same line 411 times. It had started 3 days ago, a single entry, unremarkable but for its size, the magnitude figure so large she had assumed the instrument had slipped and struck it off. Little winging Surrey. Then it had come again, smaller and again, and now it came in a slow, steady pulse, every few hours, from the same address, the same house, and the magnitude was not a child's overflow. She had looked up the scale in the old manual, the one nobody read, and the scale did not go high enough. The scale had been built by people who had never expected to need the top of it. She did what a careful person does with a thing above her grade. She wrote a memo and she sent it up, and the memo went from her small office to a larger one, and from the larger one to a door on the 9th level that had no name on it, only a number, and behind that door a man with gray eyes and a very quiet manner read it twice and did not send it up any further. He put it in a drawer. He wrote a single word on a slip of paper and gave the slip to a bird that was not an owl, and the bird went out of the ministry by a way that was not for owls, and the word on the slip was a place, and the place was in Surrey. The Department of Mysteries had been waiting, without quite knowing it was waiting, for a very long time for exactly this. Dumbledore came on the 4th day, and he came as a man, not as a headmaster, which was its own kind of disguise. Harry did not see him arrive. Harry was in the back garden pulling bindweed off the fence, which was a punishment dressed as a chore, and the first he knew of the visitor was the quality of Aunt Petunia's voice through the kitchen window, which had gone up half a tone and put on its company manners, the manners it wore for the vicar and the better neighbors, and under the company manners there was a thread of something Harry knew very well because he heard it in her whenever anything of the other world came near her tidy life. Fear, wearing a doily. He crept to the corner of the house where the drain pipe was and looked. An old man sat at Aunt Petunia's kitchen table. He was the oldest man Harry had ever seen, and he did not look old the way the men on the buses looked old. He looked old the way the church looked old, as though age were a thing he had chosen and furnished. He wore a plain traveling coat, plain enough that Harry knew at once it was not plain at all. The way the trowel was too big, and the warmth was a question. His beard was longer than any beard had a right to be, and his eyes behind his half-moon glasses were a blue that missed nothing. And they were, at that moment, moving over Aunt Petunia's kitchen, over the good plates and the photograph of Dudley, and the mark on the wall where a picture had once hung and been taken down, reading the room, and Harry, watching him read the room, understood with the green cold part of him that here was someone who did the thing Harry did, only better. Only for 100 years longer, and that this was the most dangerous person who had ever come to number 4. Down, breathed the hat from inside Harry's shirt, where it had ridden folded and flat against his chest all morning, because Harry had not been able to make himself leave it in the cupboard. Down and still, and let me listen, and Harry, whatever you feel, do not warm, do not open a single lock, do not let the wall so much as think of you. If there is one man alive who could feel it, it is this one, and he must not yet, not until we know what he wants. Harry went down against the warm brick of the house and made himself the thing he was best at, the still banked thing, and he listened. He could not hear the words, only the shapes of them. The old man's voice was low and unhurried and pleasant, and it asked things, and Aunt Petunia answered them shortly, the company manners fraying, and once she said loud enough to carry, "We took him in, didn't we? We fed and clothed him, which is more than," and the old man said something gentle that stopped her, and there was a silence, and in the silence Harry felt the old man do something. It was not a spell. It was softer than a spell and worse. It was attention. The old man turned the whole weight of his attention on the house, on the walls and the floor and the ground under the floor, the way you might lay your hand flat on a table to feel a train pass in the street. And Harry, pressed to the brick, felt the castle warmth under everything gather itself to answer that attention, to rise up and say, here he is, here is our heir, do you see him? Do you see how we love him? And Harry pressed his palms flat to the earth and thought at it with everything he had. As he had thought not now at the wall, only harder, because this mattered more. Down, please, not for him, he's clever. Down, and the warmth, which loved him the wrong amount, which wanted more than anything to show him off to the powerful stranger the way a dog wants to show its whole heart at the door, hesitated. It hung there, gathered, aching to rise. And then, because Harry asked it, because Harry was its heir, and the asking of the heir was the one law older than its love, it sank. It sank down under the garden and under the street and went quiet, so quiet that the ground under Harry's palms was only ground, cool July ground with worms in it, and the old man's attention passed over the house and the garden and the small, still boy against the brick and found nothing but a house and a garden and a small, still boy, which was what he had, after all, come expecting to find. Inside, the old man rose. Harry heard the chair. He heard the company manners see the visitor to the door, heard the front door, heard footsteps on the path, and he pressed himself smaller against the brick as the footsteps came round toward the garden gate, because of course a careful man would look at the garden, a careful man always looked at the garden, and Harry had nowhere to go. The gate opened. The old man stood in it and looked at the garden, at the fence and the bindweed, and the boy crouched at the foot of the drain pipe with dirt on his hands, and his blue eyes came to rest on Harry. And for a moment, one long moment, the two of them looked at each other across Aunt Petunia's dying lawn, the oldest wizard in Britain and the 6-year-old heir of everything, and neither of them said a word. Harry looked back at him. He did not know how to do anything else. He was 6 and he was caught, and there was dirt on his hands and a 1,000-year-old hat flat against his heart, and he simply looked, with the wide, unguarded look of a child who has not yet learned that his face can be a lie, and he let the old man see a boy who pulled bindweed and slept in a cupboard and had a scar on his forehead and knew nothing at all. The old man's face did a complicated thing. Something moved behind the blue eyes quick and was mastered, and what came up over it was gentleness, warm and sorrowful and entirely real, which was the most frightening part, because Harry could feel that the gentleness was real and could feel underneath it, cold as the green voice, that the gentleness was also being used. "Hello," said Albus Dumbledore. "Hello," said Harry. "That is a great deal of bindweed for a small gardener." "It comes back," Harry said. "You have to get the root or it comes back." Something went across the old face again, quicker than the first time. "Yes," said Dumbledore after a moment. "Yes, that is very true, you have to get the root." He looked at Harry a moment longer, and Harry had the feeling of being weighed on a scale that went higher than the manual, and then the old man inclined his head courteous to a child, which no adult had ever done to Harry in his life, and said, "Take care of your hands." Bindweed has a way of holding on, and he turned and went out of the gate and down the road, and where the road bent he was there, and then he was not there, and the street was only a street in the sun. Harry stayed against the brick until his legs told him the danger had gone. Then he took the hat out of his shirt with shaking hands and held it in his lap and said, "Did I do wrong? I talked to him. I shouldn't have talked to him." "You did not do wrong," the hat said, and its voice was strange, tight, an old thing that had had a fright. "You did something I would not have dared advise because it was too dangerous to advise, and you did it perfectly because you did it by instinct and not by cleverness, and instinct is faster than he is. You showed him a boy who knows nothing, and you kept the warmth down while he looked, which, Harry, do you understand what you did? He is the finest reader of hidden things in the world. He laid his whole attention on this house to feel what I feel, what you are, and you put your hands in the dirt and told a power that could level this street to go to sleep, and it obeyed you over its own love because you asked. There is not a wizard living who could have made it obey. There is barely a founder dead who could have. You are 6. The fold worked and worked again unsteady, and he saw a gardener. He walked away certain of a great deal and wrong about the one thing that matters, and he does not know he is wrong, which is the only safe way for a clever man to be wrong. You bought us time. I do not know how much, but you bought it." He knew about the cupboard, Harry said. It was not a question. He had heard it in the shape of Aunt Petunia's voice and what the old man had asked and what he had not needed to ask. "He's known for years. He put me here." The hat was silent for a long moment. "Yes," it said at last, and did not soften it, because Harry had asked plainly, and a plain question deserved a plain answer, and because the yellow voice under the one voice would not permit a lie to a hungry child about the thing that had made him hungry. "I believe he did. I believe he had reasons, and I believe the reasons seemed good to him, and I believe he is the sort of man who can carry a good reason like a lamp into a very dark place and never once notice that the lamp is what is casting the shadow. That is the most dangerous kind of man there is, Harry, not the cruel kind. Your aunt is cruel and your aunt is small. She will never be more than a spilled cup of tea. This man is kind and he is not small, and he left you here for 6 years for reasons that seem to him good, and he will do a great many other things for reasons that seem to him good, and some of them will be for you, and some of them will be to you, and you will not always be able to tell which until it is done." The hat drew a breath it did not need. "So, now you know the two of them. The one who fears what you are and would keep you in a cupboard for it, and the one who understands what you are better than anyone alive and would build you a finer cupboard for the very same reason and call it protection and mean it. And you will have to learn to walk between them, and you are 6, and it is not fair, and I am sorry. Godric would want me to tell you it is not fair and that we will make it fair. Salazar would want me to tell you that fairness is a story children are told, and that the only question is who holds the keys. I am going to tell you both, because you are both, and because you are going to need both before this is done." Harry sat on the dying lawn with the hat in his lap and the dirt on his hands and thought about roots, and about the old man saying you have to get the root, and about the way the old man's real gentleness and used gentleness had been the same gentleness, and he did not cry, though there was room in him for it, because crying was a warm wall, a thing that showed, and he was learning, faster than any child should have to, the great cold discipline of not showing. "Tell me the third piece," he said. "The one after don't let it be nice to me and don't open the locks, tell me the next fence." And the hat, which had waited 1,000 years for an heir, and found a child who at 6 could sit on a ruined lawn and ask for the next fence, told him. The next fence, the hat said, was the hardest of the 3 and the most useful, and it was this: to learn the difference between a kindness that is given and a kindness that is spent on you like a coin, because they wear the same face and one of them buys your freedom and the other buys you. The old man's gentleness had been real, the hat said, every ounce of it, and it had also been a coin, laid on the table between them, and the trick was not to decide the old man was a liar because he was not, but to keep one eye always on the hand that laid the coin, and ask quietly what it hoped to buy. "You will meet very few people who are simply cruel," the hat told him. Your aunt is one and she is easy, and you will meet almost no one who is simply kind, and the rest, all the rest, the important ones will be both at once, and you must learn to take the kindness and watch the hand. And never, never let being loved make you stop watching, because the people most dangerous to you will be precisely the ones who love you and mean it and want for love to keep you small. That night the castle learned his name. Harry felt it happen the way you feel a tooth come, an old ache turning at last into a new fact. He was almost asleep, the hat beside him, the warmth banked low and permitted now the house was dark, and he was drifting in his usual way down toward the between place when the drift kept going past the between place, down through the mattress and the floor and the foundation and out along the line no map would show, the whole length of England in a heartbeat into stone. He was in the castle, he was not in the castle, his body was in the cupboard and his body stayed there. But something of him, the something the hat had unfolded, went down the line and into the deep stone and stood, for the first time, in the round room under the round rock, where the fire that had never gone out burned between the four empty worn-shaped chairs, and the fire, when it saw him come, leapt up glad and gold as it had leapt on the first night, and the four colors ran together in the veins of the stone and pooled in the room and made a light with no lamp. And the castle spoke his name. Not in words, the castle did not have words, had never needed them, was 1,000 years older than the oldest word Harry knew. It spoke his name the way a bell speaks, all at once and everywhere, a single struck note that was somehow the sound of Harry, the whole of him, the 14 stairs and the one-armed soldier and the marigolds and the not showing and the tenderness he could not put down and the hunger he had never once complained of. All of it gathered into one note and rung through 400 miles of stone, and every stone that heard it, and they all heard it, took the note into itself and kept it. So that from that night the walls of Hogwarts knew him, root and rafter, dungeon and tower, and would know him forever, the way a house knows the child that was born in it, only more, because no child had ever been born so deep into a house as this. Harry, drifting half in the cupboard and half in the burning room, watched the light run into the walls with his name in it, and he was not afraid, because you cannot be afraid of a thing that loves you the wrong amount when you are 6 and it is midnight and you are at long last, and against all the arithmetic of your small hard life, warm. They are all going to come now, aren't they? He said, or thought, or rang into the deep stone. The old man, and whoever sent the bird I felt this afternoon, and the others. Because it showed, something always shows. You can't keep a thing this big from showing forever. And the castle, which could not answer in words, answered in the only way it had, which was to gather the light and the warmth and the struck note of his name, and fold them all around the something of him that stood in the burning room, close and total, the way a very old and very large thing folds itself around a small one it has waited 1,000 years to keep, and to hold him like that in the deep stone, in the light of the four colors, over the fire that had never gone out. Until the drift took him the rest of the way down into sleep. Far above, in the cupboard under the stairs, Harry's face in the dark was wet again, and warm and still. And in the round room in his office 200 miles north, Albus Dumbledore sat before a cold hearth he had not troubled to light, and turned a small tarnished object over and over in his long fingers, and thought about a gardener who knew you had to get the root, and did not sleep, and being who he was, began already, quietly, and with the very best of intentions, to plan. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The ones who come knocking. The knock came at 2:30 in the afternoon, and it was the wrong knock. Harry knew every knock that number 4 owned. He had catalogued them from the cupboard for years, because a knock told you what kind of afternoon was coming and gave you time to be ready for it. The postman knocked twice, brisk, and left. The paper boy did not knock at all. Aunt Petunia's friends from the bridge club knocked in a little run of taps that meant tea and gossip, and Harry kept indoors. Salesmen knocked with false confidence. This knock was none of them. It was a single knock, unhurried, placed against the door the way a doctor places a stethoscope, listening to the house through the wood before it had even finished sounding, and Harry, on his knees in the hall polishing the skirting board, went still all the way through, because a knock that listened back was a knock from the other world. Down, said the hat against his chest before Harry could think it. Flat, now. And Harry, whatever comes through that door, you have never heard of me, you have never heard of a castle, you are a boy with a rag and a tin of polish and nothing in the whole of your head but the skirting board. Can you do that? I do it every day, Harry breathed, and lay down along the skirting with the rag and made himself the bank still nothing and watched the front door under the hall table's legs. Aunt Petunia opened it with her chain on. Harry heard the chain. Then he heard her not speak, which was strange, because Aunt Petunia always spoke first at a door to establish whose door it was, and then he heard a voice from the step, low and level and gray, a voice with no weather in it at all. Mrs. Dursley, my name is Croker, I am from the government. Not, said the voice before she could shut the door, and the door did not shut, the government you pay your rates to, the other one, you know the one I mean. You have spent a great many years pretending you do not know the one I mean, and I am sorry to be the man who ends that arrangement, but I am afraid the arrangement has ended on its own, and I have only come to explain how. A pause. May I come in? It would be better for you if the neighbors did not see us talk. It is going to be that kind of conversation. The chain came off. That told Harry everything about how afraid Aunt Petunia was, because Aunt Petunia would sooner have let in a wolf than a scandal, and she had just weighed the wolf against the scandal and chosen the wolf. The door opened. A man came into the hall, and Harry, flat along the skirting board, looked up at him under the table and understood that the Dr. Knock had told the truth. He was gray. Not old gray, gray all through, gray suit, gray hair cropped short, gray eyes set close, a man who had been designed to be forgotten by anyone who saw him and had refined the design over a lifetime. He did not look at the good plates or the photograph of Dudley. He looked at the corners of the ceiling, and the joint of the walls and the floor, and last of all, without seeming to, at the small boy lying along the skirting board with a rag, and his gray eyes rested on Harry for exactly as long as they had rested on the corner of the ceiling, no longer, which was its own kind of terrible, because it meant that to this man a child and a corner were the same category of thing, features of a room to be measured. "That's the boy," said Croker. It was not a question. "Get up, please, not you, Mrs. Dursley, the boy." Harry got up. He kept the rag in his hand because a boy with a rag was a boy doing a chore, and he kept his eyes down because eyes down was a boy who had learned not to matter, and he stood there being the smallest and least interesting thing in the hall. And Croker looked at him with his gray, unweathered eyes, and Harry felt the man's attention go over him and past him, feeling for the thing under the house, and finding, because Harry had put it to sleep the instant the Dr. Knock landed, nothing. Said Croker. He sat them at the kitchen table, all of them, which no visitor had ever done, arranged them like a diagram. Petunia and Vernon on one side gone the color of putty, Dudley sent upstairs, and for once going without argument, Harry on a chair too tall for him with his feet not reaching the floor. Croker did not sit. He stood at the head of the table with his back to the window so that the light came past him and left his gray face in shadow, and he took from an inside pocket a small instrument, brass and glass, and set it on the table where they could all see it, and it had a needle, and the needle was still. "I am going to tell you what has happened," Croker said. "In words a muggle can follow, because two of you are muggles and the third is close enough. 9 days ago, something in this house began producing magic. Not a child's magic, not the small accidental sort that we log and forgive and expect. Magic of a magnitude that our instruments were not built to measure, because the people who built our instruments could not imagine a source that large existing, still less existing in Surrey, still less existing in a semi-detached house owned by a man who sells drills." His gray eyes moved to Vernon, who made a sound. "It has repeated, every few hours for 9 days. It is doing it now faintly underneath us, which is why my needle, Mr. Dursley, is not still. Look at it, it is not still." The needle in the brass instrument was trembling. Harry, on his too tall chair, kept his feet from swinging and his face from moving and thought, very quietly, so quietly it was barely a thought at all. "Down, please, he's testing, don't answer him." And under the kitchen the warmth, which had been banked all afternoon, banked itself lower, and the needle in the brass instrument steadied and stilled and stopped. Croker looked at it for a long moment. "That," he said softly, "is interesting. A moment ago it was moving, now it is not. Something in this house is aware of my instrument and does not wish it to move." He raised his gray eyes and put them at last fully on Harry, and this time they did not slide past. "It is aware of me. And it is protecting you." He tilted his head a fraction. "It is you, isn't it, not the house, you." "Now," said the hat, very low against Harry's chest, felt more than heard. "Look up at him, give him the gardener, slowly." Harry lifted his eyes to the gray man, and he made his face into the face he had shown Dumbledore on the ruined lawn, the wide, unguarded face of a child who has not learned that his face can lie, and he said in a small, puzzled voice, "I've been doing the skirting board." There was a silence. Croker looked at the boy with the rag and the dangling feet and the honest, bewildered eyes, and something in his gray certainty wavered, because the child in front of him was so plainly, so completely a child, and the thing under the house was so plainly, so completely not, and a lesser man would have let the wavering settle him. Croker was not a lesser man. He had spent 40 years in a windowless department learning that the most dangerous things wear the most ordinary faces, and he set his certainty back up on its feet and said quietly, "Yes, I imagine you have. Mrs. Dursley, I am authorized to remove the child for study. He will be well kept. The department has facilities. He will not be harmed. Harm is not the point. The point is that a magical source of this magnitude cannot be permitted to sit unmonitored in a Muggle street. You understand that? You have wanted him gone for 6 years. I am offering you the thing you have wanted, and all it will cost you is that you never speak of it, which is also the thing you have wanted. We are Mrs. Dursley on the same side." And Aunt Petunia, who had wanted Harry gone every day of 6 years, looked at the gray man offering to take him and did not say yes. Harry saw it happen and did not understand it and kept it to look at later. She did not say yes. Her mouth worked and no yes came out of it, and what came out instead, thin and grudging and astonishing, was, "He's my sister's boy," as though the words were being pulled out of her against her will by a root she had thought long dead, and then she pressed her lips together and looked at her own hands on the table and said nothing more, and Vernon stared at her, a woman who had suddenly grown a second head. Croker did not care about any of it. Croker had authorization. He took from another pocket a length of ordinary-looking rope, frayed at both ends, and Harry felt the hat go rigid against his chest and heard it say one word, urgent, the first time it had ever sounded truly frightened. Portkey. He means to take you by force. Harry, do not touch it, do not let it touch you, and whatever happens next, remember that you did not make it happen. It made itself. You are allowed to be defended. Take hold of the rope, please, said Croaker, holding it out across the table to the 6-year-old, level and gray and reasonable. It will feel unpleasant for a moment, then it will be over and you will be somewhere clean and you will never scrub a skirting board again. Take hold of the rope. Harry looked at the frayed rope in the gray man's hand. He did not take it. He put his hands in his lap under the table, and he pressed them flat against the underside of Aunt Petunia's kitchen table, which was wood, which stood on a floor, which stood on the earth of Surrey, which stood on the deep line that ran the length of England into stone. And he did not ask the castle for anything, because the hat had told him not to open the locks, and he did not open a lock. He only pressed his hands to the wood and let the thing under the house feel, for one unguarded instant, that a stranger was holding out a rope to carry its heir away. And the oldest magic in Britain, which loved him the wrong amount, woke. It did not come the way a spell comes, fast and bright and gone. It came the way weather comes, or tide, or the turning of a very great wheel, slow and total and without any hurry at all, because it had 1,000 years and the intruder had only the length of an afternoon. The kitchen went warm. Then it went warmer, and the warmth had a smell, bread and rain, and turned earth and old fire. And the light coming past Croaker's gray shoulder from the window thickened and took on color. 4 colors, red and blue and yellow and green, faint at first and then not faint, running along the edges of the cupboards and the rim of the sink and the frame of the door, so that Aunt Petunia's ordinary kitchen stood suddenly veined with light as the deep stone was veined, as though the house had remembered all at once that it too was made of the world, and the world belonged to the boy on the too-tall chair. Croaker felt it. His gray eyes widened by a fraction, which on his face was the same as another man's scream, and he thrust the rope forward to press it into Harry's hands before whatever was gathering could finish gathering, and the rope did not reach Harry. It stopped an inch from him. It hung in the air an inch from the boy's chest, straining forward, and could not close the inch, because the air in that inch had become the struck note of Harry's name, and no thing that meant to carry him off could pass through the sound of who he was. Interesting, Croaker said through his teeth and drew his wand, and Harry felt the hat flinch, and the gray man began fast and clipped and expert, a spell that was not gentle, a spell to put the child to sleep so that the thing defending the child would have nothing to defend, and that was his mistake, because the oldest magic had been patient with the rope. The rope only meant to take Harry away, but the wand meant to reach into Harry and switch him off, and the oldest magic would not be patient with that. The floor of Aunt Petunia's kitchen rose, not violently. That was the horror and the wonder of it both. The good clean lino and the boards beneath it and the concrete beneath that and the ancient ground beneath that all rose together, smooth and slow and unstoppable, a swell of stone coming up under the world the size of the whole room. And Croaker's polished shoes were suddenly ankle-deep in a floor that had decided to be liquid and then decided around his ankles to be stone again, holding him, not crushing, holding, the way you hold a wrist you have caught in the act. And the light ran up his gray suit in its 4 colors and found his face and stopped there, and Croaker of the Department of Mysteries, who had walked into rooms that unmade lesser men, stood held to the floor of a Surrey kitchen by a power 1,000 years old and looked into a light with 4 colors in it, and went under his gray, the color of a much younger and much more frightened man. The wand was still in his hand. The spell was still half said. And the light, or the thing behind the light, the vast slow-breathing thing, considered the wand and the half-said spell with the patience of stone, and Harry felt it decide, felt the enormous will of it draw back to strike, to end the gray man who had raised a wand at its air, felt it gather to break him the way you break a stick, without malice, as a simple correction of the world. No, Harry said. He said it out loud in the ringing 4-colored kitchen in his small voice, and he did not say it to Croaker. He said it to the floor, to the walls, to the light, to the thing under the house that loved him the wrong amount and was about to kill a man for him. He put both his hands flat on the tabletop where everyone could see them now, and he leaned down over them toward the risen stone floor, and he said, "No, you mustn't. He raised a wand at me and that was wrong, but you mustn't break him, because breaking him is the thing the bad ones do, and if you break him for me then I'm one of the bad ones, and I won't, do you hear me? I won't be one of the bad ones even to be safe. Let him go, frighten him if you have to, but let him go." The kitchen held its breath, if a kitchen can. Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon were pressed back against the wall, the color of putty and beyond speech. Croaker stood ankle-deep in stone in the 4-colored light with his half-said spell dying on his tongue, and the oldest magic in Britain, gathered to kill, heard its 6-year-old heir tell it, with everything he had, to be better than its love, and it hung there one terrible moment on the edge of the choice. Then it obeyed him, because he asked. Because he never lied to it, and he was not lying now, and the truth he held up to it, that he would rather be endangered than be defended by murder, was a truth so bright and so far above the reach of its thousand-year patience that the oldest magic, which had woken believing it had come to serve a master, understood in that instant that it had come instead to serve something rarer, and folded down its killing will and did as it was told. The stone released Croaker's ankles. The floor sank back slow and smooth into lino and board and concrete and ground and left no crack, no seam, nothing a photograph could hold. The four colors drained out of the edges of the room and back down into the deep. The warmth banked itself low. And Croaker stood in an ordinary kitchen in an ordinary afternoon with his shoes on an ordinary floor and his wand loose in a hand that had begun very slightly to shake, and looked at the 6-year-old on the too-tall chair who had just in front of him ordered the impossible to spare his life. He put his wand away. He picked up his brass instrument, whose needle was hurling itself against its pin, and he pocketed it without looking at it. He coiled the frayed rope and pocketed that too. He looked at Harry for a long moment with his gray eyes, and whatever category he had put the child in when he came through the door, corner of a ceiling, feature of a room, he took the child out of it now and put him somewhere else, somewhere that had no name in 40 years of the department, and what he said, when he found his level voice again, he said not to Petunia and not to Vernon but to Harry quietly, almost with respect. "You told it to let me go. You raised a wand at me," Harry said. "But you didn't get to be broken. Nobody's got to be broken. That's the rule." "Whose rule?" Harry did not answer because he did not have the words yet for whose rule it was, and because the hat was pressing flat and silent against his chest telling him to say no more, and Croaker looked at the boy who had a rule and would not name it and nodded once slowly, as a man nods who has just seen the thing he was sent to contain and understood all at once that it cannot be contained, not because it is too strong to catch, though it is, but because it will not consent to be the kind of thing you catch. "I have to report this," Croaker said. "You understand, it is my function. I will report that the source is bonded to the child, that it defends the child, that it cannot be removed or studied or held, and that it appears to be governed." And here, for the only time, something almost human crossed his gray face. "By the child, by his rules, which is the most alarming thing I have ever had to write in a report, and I have written some alarming things." He moved toward the door. At it he paused and looked back, not at Harry now, but at Petunia pressed against the wall. "You should have said yes, Mrs. Dursley, not for the department's sake, for his, because I am the reasonable one. I am the one who came with rope instead of curses. There are others who felt the same thing my instruments felt, 9 days of it, singing up out of Surrey, and they are already asking one another what it is and where it is and how a man might take it for himself, and they will not knock, and they will not offer you the thing you want, and they will not have a rule about who gets broken." His gray eyes found Harry one last time. Someone should get him somewhere with walls, real walls, soon. And he opened the door and stepped out into the ordinary sunlight, and by the time Petunia had crossed the hall to shut it, he was not on the step, and not on the path, and not on the road, gone the clean total way the old man had gone, leaving the kitchen ringing with a silence that had 4 colors in it. When the door was shut, Aunt Petunia stood with her back against it, her hand still on the latch, and did not move for a long time. Vernon had found his voice at last and was using it, low and fast, a river of it, about the government and the neighbors and what would people say, and had she gone mad? Refusing when the man had offered to take the boy offered, and Petunia let it run over her without hearing a word, and looked at Harry across the hall with an expression Harry had never once seen on her in 6 years and could not read, because it had no cruelty in it to give him his bearings. Harry stood by the skirting board with his rag still in his hand and did not know what he was permitted to do, because all the ordinary rules of the house had been in the kitchen when the floor rose, and he was not sure any of them had survived. So he did the safe thing, the trained thing. He knelt back down and began quietly to polish the skirting board again, because a boy who was polishing was a boy who was not a problem, and problems in this house were the thing you did not want to be. "Leave it," Aunt Petunia said. Harry looked up. She had never in his life told him to leave a chore. Chores were the whole of what she wanted from him. "Leave the skirting board," she said again, and her voice was strange, thin and flat and far away, and she was not looking at him now but at the middle distance, at something a long way off and long ago. And Harry understood with the green cold part of him that she was not seeing him at all. She was seeing his mother, the sister she had thrown out of her life and her family and her tidy story, and that the words she had pulled up out of the dead root in the kitchen, "He's my sister's boy," had cost her something she had not meant to spend and had not stopped costing her. Go and sit down somewhere, not the cupboard, just go and sit down. And she went into the kitchen where the floor had been stone and shut the door, and Harry heard the tap run and heard nothing else, and stood in the hall holding a rag he had been told to put down in a house whose rules had all just changed, and did not understand that he had in a single afternoon become a thing his aunt was too frightened to be cruel to, which is a colder and lonelier safety than kindness, and a safety all the same. Harry did not sleep that night. He lay in the cupboard with the hat and the soldier and the warmth banked low, and his scar hurt. It had begun in the kitchen when the floor rose, a cold hard ache over his eye in the middle of all the warmth, and it had not stopped. It sat there now in the dark, a splinter of winter, and the castle warmth pressed in around it and drew back and pressed in again, worrying at it, and every time the warmth touched the cold spot the ache sharpened and Harry's eyes watered, and he pressed the heel of his hand to it and said, "It won't stop." Why won't it stop? The hat was quiet for a long time. When it spoke, its voice had changed again, gone careful, gone into the register it used for the largest true things, and Harry had learned to be still for that register. "Harry," it said, "I am going to ask you to trust me about a thing I am not going to fully explain tonight because you are 6 and you have already, this one afternoon, done more than most wizards do in a lifetime, and there is a limit to how much a cup should hold in a day. Will you trust me?" "Yes." "There is something over your eye that does not belong to you," the hat said. "You have carried it a long time, since before you can remember, and it has been quiet and small, and it has been getting quieter and smaller its whole life, feeding slowly on the thing that lives in a house like this, on the cold and the hunger and the being unwanted, growing its roots down into you a thread at a time. It is a very small piece of a very bad thing, and it is a guest that was never invited, and the reason your scar hurts tonight is that the oldest magic in Britain has just, for the first time, gotten a proper look at it. The fold worked slow, and it does not like what it sees. It has spent 1,000 years being the thing that keeps a castle safe for children, and it has just found, sunk into the forehead of the child it loves best in all the world, a splinter of the precise kind of darkness it was made to keep out. It is angry, Harry. I have never felt it angry before. It is not angry at you. It is angry at the splinter, and it wants, very badly, to take it out." Harry lay in the dark with his hand over the cold ache. "Then take it out," he said simply, the way a child says a simple thing about a splinter, because to a child a splinter is a splinter and you take it out. "It is not that simple," said the hat, "and we will not do it tonight, and we may not do it for a long time, because the splinter has roots in you, and the roots are old, and pulling them wrong could pull something of you with them. And the oldest magic knows this, which is the only reason it has not already done it, because it loves you too much to hurt you even to help you. So it waits, and it studies, and it hates. And your scar aches while it does, and I am sorry, and it will pass by morning, and I want you to hear the good part, Harry, because there is a good part, and it is very good." The hat's voice gentled the whole way down. "For 6 years that splinter grew, because everything in this house fed it, and tonight and every night since I came it has begun very slightly to shrink, because you are warm now, because you are found. Because a thing that lives on cold and hunger and being unwanted starves in the light, and you have been let into the light at last, and the guest that was never invited is, for the first time in your life, going hungry in your house instead of you." Harry lay still for a while, holding that. "Good," he said at last, fierce and small, into the dark. "Let it be hungry, see how it likes it." And the hat, which had felt 4 founders' worth of hard true feeling in its 1,000 years, felt something it did not have a founder's name for and said nothing, and let the warmth come up a little higher in the walls than it usually permitted at night, all the way up around the cold splinter, patient and starving slow, and the ache dulled, and Harry at long last slept. He dreamed the founders, and the dream was the hat's doing, a gift and a warning folded into one. He stood in the round room under the round rock, over the fire that had never gone out, and this time the 4 worn chairs were not empty. They were full. And Harry, 6 years old in his dream, looked at the 4 people who had made the world he had just been named the heir of, and they looked back at him, and they were not statues and they were not ghosts. They were people, and that was the largest thing about them, that they were only people, 4 clever, brave, stubborn, quarrelsome people who had loved each other in a school and in the end disagreed to the point of ruin, and had reached across 1,000 years of death to have their leftover coals meet him at last. Godric was on his feet before Harry had finished arriving, big and red-bearded and grinning, and he came round the fire and went down on one knee to be Harry's height, which no grown man in Harry's life had done except in mockery, and he did it without mockery, and he looked at Harry with fierce wet eyes and said, "There you are, you scrap, there you are. 1,000 years and here you are, and you're small, and they've kept you in a cupboard, and by every fire in the world when this is done we are going to have words about the cupboard." And he laughed, and it was the warmest sound Harry had ever heard, and it broke something open in him that the hose in the kitchen had not managed to break. Rowena did not rise. She leaned forward in her chair with her chin on her fist and looked at Harry with the blue-cold hunger he had heard in the second voice, delighted, weighing, and she said, "He held it back. Did you see, the ministry man? It was going to kill and he held it back, not by being stronger than it, by being righter than it. Do you know how rare that is, Godric? Do you know how vanishingly rare?" And Godric said, "I saw I was there, I'm always there, stop lecturing the child." And Rowena said, "I am not lecturing him, I am admiring him, there is a difference, you never could tell them apart." And Harry understood that they had been having this exact argument for 1,000 years and would go on having it forever, and that it was, somehow, how they loved. Helga came and sat on the floor beside him, on the stone, in her good robes, so that she was his height too, and she did not say anything grand at all. She said, "Have you eaten today?" and when Harry in the dream shook his head, her broad, kind face went still, and she looked up at the other three, and something passed between the four of them, some old shared grief, and she took Harry's hand in her warm, dry hand and held it and said, "That ends now. Do you hear me, child? Whatever else these three fill your head with, courage and cleverness and cold, long games, you hold on to this one from me. You are allowed to be fed. You have always been allowed to be fed. They lied to you about that first, before all the other lies, and it was the cruelest lie, and it is the first one we take back." And Salazar last spoke from his chair and did not come round the fire, and Harry looked at him with the green, watchful part of himself and was not afraid of him, though the world had taught everyone to be. He was lean and dark and tired-looking, and his eyes were old, and when he spoke his voice was quiet and precise, and it went straight to the cold place under everything. "They will all want you now," Salazar said. "That is what I came back 1,000 years to tell you, because the other three will tell you how to be good, and you will need it, but you will also need this, and they are too fond of you to say it plainly, so I will. Every power in your world will want you before the year is out. The gray ones from the ministry will want a cage and study you. The old families will want to own you, to marry their daughters to you in 15 years and hang your name on their walls. The kind old man in the tower will want to shape you gently into the shape he has already decided the world needs, and he will call it love, and it will be love, and it will still be a cage. And there is a thing in the dark over the water that is not dead though it should be, that wore my name once and disgraced it, and it will want you most of all because it thinks it is my heir, and it has just felt a truer heir named, and it will not forgive that. They will all come, Harry Potter. And the only defense I have to give you, the only one that has ever worked in all the long history of the wanted, is this. Know what you want before they tell you what you want, and hold to it under everything, and never, never let the wanting of powerful people become the same thing in your head as your own wanting. That is how they take you, not with ropes. With ropes you learn to refuse this afternoon, and I have never been prouder of a child I have only just met. They take you by making their want feel like yours. Guard the border of your own wanting like a castle wall, and you will die free however you die, and that is more than I managed, and it is the only inheritance I have left worth giving. The four of them looked at him then, all four at once, over the fire that had never gone out, and Harry looked back at them, 6 years old, small, cupboarded, fed at last in a dream by a woman 1,000 years dead, and he did not have any words big enough, so he did the only thing he had, which was to hold on. To Helga's warm hand, and to Godric's fierce wet grin, and to Rowena's delighted weighing eyes, and to Salazar's tired precise love, all four at once, all four grates burning in one small grate, and the fire between them leapt up high and glad and gold, and the round room filled with light in 4 colors, and somewhere far above, in a cupboard under the stairs in Surrey, a boy slept with tears drying warm on his face and a splinter of winter going hungry over his eye. In a crooked shop at the bent end of Knockturn Alley, where the good light of Diagon never quite reached, and the goods on the shelves were older than the shelves and worse, a man named Peregrine Ashcombe was closing his ledgers for the night when a clerk who owed him a great deal of money and a small amount of blood came in without knocking, and told him a thing that made him set down his quill. Ashcombe dealt in relics. He called himself an antiquary, and his card said antiquary, and what he was, under the good word, was a man who bought and sold the leavings of the dead great, and there was no leaving of the dead great he prized above the 4 founders of Hogwarts, whose every button and bone comb and cracked drinking cup he had spent 30 years chasing across the dark corners of the world for the old families who paid, in gold and worse than gold, to hang a piece of a founder on a wall and call their blood ancient. He had handled a comb once that Rowena Ravenclaw was said to have owned, and sold it for a house. He had handled worse things and sold them for more, and he had believed, until this clerk came dripping ministry gossip onto his good floor, that he had already handled the greatest found relics that survived in the world. "Say it again," Ashcombe said very quietly. Slowly, the magnitude, the bonding, the word they used on the 9th level. The clerk said it again. Heir, the oldest magic, awake. A child, Surrey, bonded, governed, uncontainable. And Peregrine Ashcombe sat in his crooked shop among the leavings of the dead and understood, the way only a man who has spent his whole life pricing the priceless can understand, that everything on his shelves was a button, and that somewhere in a Muggle county to the south there was now walking about, in a small body, unguarded, the only true and living relic of all 4 founders that had existed in 1,000 years, the artifact to end all artifacts. The acquisition that would make every buyer in the old families weep to own and ruin themselves to bid for, and that it was, at present, being protected by nothing but a talking hat and the ignorance of a Muggle street. He did not think of the child as a child. He had never in 30 years thought of a founder relic as anything but a price. He capped his ink and drew a fresh sheet, and began to write letters in a fine antiquary's hand, to a very short and very dangerous list of the sort of people who did not ask where a thing had come from, and the first line of every letter was the same, and it was, "I have found something you have wanted your whole life, and you have not yet begun to imagine the price." 200 miles north, Albus Dumbledore received Croker's report at 11 the next morning, by a bird that was not an owl, and read it standing at his window, and when he had finished it, he stood a long while looking out over the grounds toward the far gray water and the deep rock under it, and his face was very tired and very old. He had known it would come to this. He had hoped it would come to this later, when the child was grown enough to be guided, not now, not at 6, not with the whole hungry world turning its face toward a single small house. But hope, he had learned across the long, expensive length of his life, was a thing one owed the truth to, and the truth was in Croker's gray, careful hand on the paper in front of him. The source is bonded to the child, it defends the child, it is governed by the child, it cannot be contained. And under Croker's words, unwritten, Dumbledore read the rest, the part Croker had not known to write because Croker did not know what the hat was or what the founders had made it to do. He read a name-shaped clause in a 1,000-year-old enchantment, at last filled. He read the oldest magic in Britain, awake after 10 centuries of sleep, bound to a 6-year-old with a splinter of Tom Riddle's soul over his eye, and no defense in the world against the men who would come for him, but a talking hat and a rule about who gets broken. And Albus Dumbledore, who loved him, and who had left him in the cupboard for 6 years for reasons that had seemed to him good, and who would go on doing things for reasons that seemed to him good until the day he died of one of them, made the decision he had been circling since the night the instrument spun, and he made it, as he made all his decisions, with the very best of intentions, and with one eye already on the shape he meant the world to take. He would bring the boy to Hogwarts. Where the walls were real, where the oldest magic was, so the boy and the magic would be under one roof, and that roof his. Where he could keep the child safe from the gray ones and the old families and the thing over the water. And where he could, gently over time, with love, begin to teach a 6-year-old heir of everything, the single most important lesson Albus Dumbledore believed he had to teach, which was that great power is a trust to be managed by wise and careful hands, and that the wisest and most careful hands, tested by 100 years of terrible choices, were, though it grieved him to think it and he thought it anyway, his own. He rang for a quill. He began to write a letter to number 4 Privet Drive, in a hand as warm as a hearth and as considered as a chess opening, inviting a boy home to the castle that had been waiting 1,000 years to hold him, and never once in all the kind careful lines of it, mentioning the word he was thinking, which was not home and was not safe and was, in the oldest and most honest chamber of his heart, mine. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The heart of the stone. The letter came by owl in daylight to the front door of number 4, and Aunt Petunia took it in with 2 fingers as though it might be catching, and did not throw it on the fire, which was the whole of the change in her, and the change was enormous. It was addressed to Harry. Not the boy, not Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, which was the address he had once in another life been sent by owls, but simply Harry in a hand as warm as a hearth, and inside there was one line, and the line said, "You are wanted at home if you will come, and there will be a fire lit, and no one will ever put you in a cupboard again." It was signed with a single name, and the name was Albus. "He'll come for you tomorrow," Aunt Petunia said, standing in the hall with the letter held out to Harry at arm's length, not meeting his eyes. The old one from before. She had never once spoken to Harry of before. "You'll go with him, it's a school, it's the school your mother went to." Her mouth did the thing it had done in the kitchen, the pull-droot thing. She was happy there. "She wrote me letters about it the first year before I stopped." She stopped now too, and pressed her lips white, and pushed the letter the last inch into Harry's hand, and turned to go. And at the foot of the stairs she halted without turning round and said, to the wall in a voice with all the doily gone out of it, "She'd have wanted you to have the fire lit, whatever else. She'd have wanted that." And she went up the 14 stairs, and Harry heard her bedroom door, and that was the last thing Aunt Petunia ever said to him that mattered, and it was, against every year that had come before it, almost a kindness. "Well," said the hat from inside his shirt when the hall was empty, "there is a woman being visited, very late and very briefly, by the ghost of the sister she murdered in her own heart 30 years ago. It will not make her kind. It has come too late to make her kind. But it is a true thing, and you should keep it, because it is the only true thing she has ever given you, and you are going to need every true thing you can carry where we are going." Harry held the letter with its one warm line and its dangerous warm signature, and read it 4 times, and did not answer the question the hat had not quite asked, which was whether he trusted it. He did not trust it. He had learned the 3rd fence. He watched the hand that laid the coin. But under the watching, in the yellow root of him, something ached toward the words, "There will be a fire lit the way a plant aches toward a window," and he was 6, and he let himself want it, and he watched himself want it, both at once, which the hat had told him was the whole trick of surviving the wanted. Dumbledore came at noon the next day, and he did not knock the doctor's knock or the salesman's knock. He simply was on the step when Harry opened the door, tall and plain-coated and blue-eyed, with a battered carpet-bag in one hand that Harry knew at once held more than a bag that size could hold. "Hello again," said Dumbledore, the gardener. "Hello," said Harry. "I have brought you almost nothing to pack, on the theory that you have almost nothing to pack, and I find I am, sadly, correct." The blue eyes went past Harry into the hall, to the cupboard under the stairs with its bolt and its little door, and rested there, and something crossed the old face, quick and grieved, and Harry thought real. "Is there anything in there you wish to bring?" Harry went and got the tin soldier. He did not get the hat, because the hat was already against his heart, and had been since dawn, flat and silent, and watching through the cloth. He came back with the one-armed soldier in his fist, and stood in front of the oldest wizard in Britain, and said, That's all, everything else is theirs." Dumbledore looked at the soldier with the missing arm for a moment, and then he crouched slowly, all his ears folding down until his half-moon glasses were level with Harry's, and he looked at the soldier and not at Harry when he spoke, which was, Harry understood, a courtesy, the courtesy of not making a child perform his own poverty to your face. "A good soldier," Dumbledore said, "the best kind, the kind that has lost something and stands his post regardless. I had one like him once, a very long time ago." He straightened, his knees cracking, an old man's sound and a young man's plan. "Take his hand then, not the soldier's, mine. We are going a way that is quicker than a car and rather worse, and I should not like to lose you between here and Scotland." Harry put his hand into the old dry hand, and thought, clear and quiet and only to himself, "Watch the hand that holds you," and Dumbledore turned on the spot, and the world folded shut like a fist and squeezed, and Privet Drive and the cupboard and the 14 stairs and Aunt Petunia, and the whole of the small hard country of Harry's first 6 years were gone, pressed out of existence between one heartbeat and the next. And when the world let go and opened again, they were standing on a road in the mountains under a wide gray northern sky, and the air was cold and smelled of water and heather and something older, and across a black lake on a rock over the water stood the castle. Harry forgot, for a moment, everything the hat had taught him. He forgot the third fence and the watching and the not showing. He stood on the road with his hand in Dumbledore's and the soldier in his fist, and looked at the castle he had seen only in dreams and in a spoonful of the sea. And it was real, and it was enormous, more stone than there was in the world, towers on towers, and the gray light lay on it, and the black water lay beneath it, and Harry's whole chest filled up with something too big to name, that was not fear and was not joy and was, perhaps, both, and he made a sound, small, involuntary. The sound a person makes when they see the sea for the first time, or a mountain, or the thing they were made for, and the castle felt him come, he felt it feel him. Across the black water a mile off, the great pile of stone shivered awake from its roots to its weathercocks, and every window that faced the road caught the gray light at once and turned it gold, 1,000 panes going gold together in a long ripple down the length of the castle, and the sound came across the water a moment later, low and vast and glad, the struck bell note of his own name rung out of 400 yards of stone, so deep it was felt in the teeth and the breastbone before it was heard in the ear. And the gates at the end of the road, the great wrought-iron gates with the winged boars, swung wide before either of them had taken a step, swung wide and stood open, the way a door is thrown open in a house when the one everyone has waited for is finally seen coming up the path. Harry felt Dumbledore go still beside him. It was a small stillness, mastered at once, but Harry had spent 6 years learning to read the stillnesses of powerful people, and he read this one. The gates had not opened for Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore had passed through those gates 10,000 times, and they had never once opened themselves for him. He opened them with a word as the master of the school. And they had just thrown themselves wide for a 6-year-old with a broken toy, without a word, without permission, gladly, and the master of the school had felt his own castle reach past him toward the child whose hand he held, and had understood in that small mastered stillness that the walls he had brought the boy to for safekeeping did not, in the oldest chamber of themselves, belong to him at all. "Well," said Dumbledore lightly, pleasantly, and the lightness was a beautiful piece of work, and Harry heard the labor in it. "It seems you are expected. Shall we not keep the castle waiting? It has, I am told, waited quite long enough." They walked up the road, the old man and the small boy, and the castle came to meet them the only way a castle can, which is to grow, filling more and more of the gray sky the nearer they came, until Harry had to tip his head all the way back to find the tops of the towers, and gave up because there was no finding the tops of them. They went up into the low cloud and did not come down. The black lake lay flat and cold on their left, and Harry looked at it, and the lake looked back at him, and something moved in it, huge and unhurried, and did not surface, and he understood without being told that it was only saying hello. The road should have been long. It was a mile of climbing at least, and Harry's legs were short and his belly was empty, and by rights he should have been carried the last of it. He was not tired. He noticed it and turned it over. The road was gentling under his feet, the stones flattening, the slope easing, the mile folding itself quietly shorter for the heir who could not have walked it, and doing it so smoothly that Dumbledore, striding beside him, did not appear to feel the ground rearrange its distances, though Harry felt it in the soles of his feet, the castle bending the world by inches to spare a 6-year-old the length of his own arrival. The great doors stood at the top of a flight of stone steps worn into shallow bowls by 1,000 years of feet, and they were oak and iron and taller than a house, and they were shut. Dumbledore climbed the steps and lifted his hand to them out of habit, out of 100 years of habit, to speak the word that opened them. He did not reach them. The doors which had opened for Albus Dumbledore 10,000 times at his word, opened now before his hand had crossed half the distance, swung inward on their vast iron hinges without a sound, without a word, without him. And beyond them the entrance hall of Hogwarts stood full of torchlight, every torch lit, though the school was empty and it was noon and no one had lit them, lit all down the long hall in 2 rows leading inward, the way a house is lit for a homecoming. And in the middle of all that unasked light, at the foot of a marble stair, a tall woman in dark green stood waiting, with her hands folded and her chin high and her whole proper welcome ready on her tongue. They gave him a room, and the room undid him more than the towers had. It was up a stair that had rearranged itself, Harry saw, to be shorter for him than it had been for the 2 teachers who climbed it ahead, the steps gentling their pitch under his short legs and steepening again behind him, and the room at the top was small, which was right, which was kind. A small warm round room in a tower with a window that looked at the water and a bed with 4 posts and a fire already lit in the grate, a real fire burning for him, and Harry stood in the doorway and could not go in. "It is yours," said the woman who had climbed the stair, "for as long as you want it and longer." Her name was Professor McGonagall, and she was tall and square-shouldered in dark green, with her hair scraped back and a face built for sternness that was not being stern now, and she had met them at the great doors with her mouth set to say something proper and welcoming, and had taken one look at Harry, at the size of him, at the wrists of him, at the borrowed clothes 4 sizes too big, and how he stood in a doorway waiting to be told he was not allowed. And the proper welcome had died on her tongue, and something else had come up behind her eyes, hot and appalled and carefully held. "Go in," she said now gently to Harry. "It will not vanish. It is really yours. Go and sit by your fire." Harry went in. He walked to the fire and stood in front of it and put his hands out to it, and the heat came into his palms, real heat, a fire that was for him and not through a floor and not a punishment for anyone, and he stood there with his hands out and his back to the 2 teachers, and his shoulders, which had been square and still and banked for the whole of his short life, came down and shook once, and he did not turn around, and he did not make a sound, and Professor McGonagall behind him watched a 6-year-old warm his hands at the first fire that had ever been lit for him, and turned very deliberately to the headmaster, and her voice when it came was low and level and terrible. "Albus," she said, "a word outside." They went outside. They thought the door was shut. Harry, who could hear a tin of pudding open through a whole house, heard every word, and so did the hat, flat against his heart, and neither of them ever forgot it. 6 years, said McGonagall, and her control made it worse, not better. "I watched you leave him there, on a doorstep, in November. I told you they were the worst sort of muggles I had ever seen. I watched them all day. I told you, and you told me it was safest. You told me his aunt would take him in. And I trusted you, Albus. I trusted you because you are you. And I have just watched that child flinch at a doorway because he does not believe he is allowed inside a room, and warm his hands at a fire as though he has never." Her voice cracked and steadied, iron over the crack. "What did we leave him to? What did I let you leave him to?" And Dumbledore's voice, when it answered, was old and tired and did not defend itself, which was, Harry understood, its own kind of cleverness and also, he thought, real. "Something worse than I imagined," Dumbledore said quietly. "Yes, I told myself it was hardship, and hardship builds. I told myself 100 things, Minerva, and I chose the reasons that let me do the thing I had decided was necessary, which is the oldest trick a clever man plays, and I am old enough and clever enough to have known I was playing it, and I played it anyway, for reasons I still, God help me, believe were sound. And now the ground has moved, and the reasons have not saved him from anything, and the thing I feared and the thing I hoped have arrived on the same afternoon in the same small body, and I do not know, Minerva, for the first time in a long time, I do not entirely know what I am going to do." "You are going to feed him," said McGonagall. "That you are going to do first. Everything else can wait behind that." "Yes," said Dumbledore, and something in his voice bent. "Yes, that first." "You are quite right. That, at least, is a thing I know how to do." They fed him. Helga Hufflepuff, 1,000 years dead, would have been satisfied at last, because they fed him properly and slowly and without making him ask, and Harry ate in the small round room by his own fire, until the ache low in his stomach that had been his companion for 6 years fell quiet, truly quiet, fed quiet. A silence he did not have any experience of, and kept touching with his mind like a tongue touching the gap of a lost tooth. McGonagall sat with him and did not talk much, and made sure the plate was filled again before it was empty, so that he never once had to see the bottom of it. And Harry understood that this was on purpose, and that she had thought about it, and he added her quietly to the very short list of grown-ups who had ever done a kind thing to him on purpose, a list that until 9 days ago had been empty and now had a hat on it, and 4 dead founders, and provisionally, watchfully. An old man who admitted his own tricks, and now a stern green woman who kept a plate from ever being empty. The food had come by a road Harry did not see, but he saw who carried the last of it, because when McGonagall stepped out to fetch more bread, a creature came in with it instead, a small creature knee-high with ears like a bat and eyes like tennis balls and a clean pillowcase belted at the waist, carrying a loaf nearly its own size, and it stopped just inside the door and looked at Harry and began silently to cry. "You is him," the creature whispered. It set the loaf down with enormous care, the loaf a thing of impossible price, the table an altar, and then it could not help itself. It came and knelt by Harry's chair and looked up at him with its huge streaming eyes. "You is the one. The stones is singing your name, sir, all night, all day, 9 days now, up and down the deep walls where only elves is hearing it, and the old elves is saying it cannot be. The air is a story, the air is not coming, and Winky is saying, Winky is telling them." It pressed its long fingers to its mouth. "Forgive Winky, sir. Winky is forgetting herself. It is only that we is waiting so long. 1,000 years the Hogwarts elves is keeping the kitchens ready for an heir who never comes, keeping a place laid, sir, at the deep table, one place always laid, always empty, 1,000 years of an empty place, and tonight," the great eyes overflowed again. "Tonight Winky is allowed to fill it, tonight there is someone to feed." Harry looked at the small weeping creature kneeling by his chair, who had waited 1,000 years, across all the generations of her kind, for someone to feed, and he did the only thing that made any sense to him, which was to break a piece off the loaf she had carried and hold it out to her, because she was crying, and because in the whole of his 6 years no one had ever once broken bread and handed it to Harry, and he knew in the yellow root of him exactly what it was worth to be handed a piece of bread by someone who had been hungry, and he would not let the one who had kept his empty place go on kneeling there unfed. Winky looked at the bread in the boy's small hand like a creature to whom the sun had come down and offered to shine for her personally, and took it in both her long fingers, and ate it, weeping, and the castle all around them in its deep stone made a sound that Harry felt in his breastbone, low and glad and satisfied, the sound of a house 1,000 years hungry to be a home, finally, over one shared loaf becoming one. And that night when the castle was dark, the oldest magic came for him properly and took him down. It did not come as a dream this time. He was awake. He knew he was awake because the fire was still burning in the grate and the soldier was in his hand and the hat was on the pillow beside him, and he heard the hat say low, "It wants you, not a dream this time, the real thing. It has waited 1,000 years to show you what you are, and it will not wait for morning. Do you want to go?" And Harry said, "Will you come?" And the hat said, "I cannot, it is not for me. I am the finger that pointed, I am not the thing pointed at. This part is yours alone, Harry, and it is the reason you were born, and I will be here on the pillow when you come back, and you will come back. Go down, say yes to the stair." Harry got out of bed, and the floor of the tower room, the good stone floor, opened. It did not break. It opened the way water opens, or a flower, or a hand, and where it opened there were stairs going down, black stairs of the deep old stone, lit by no torch and needing none, because the 4 colors ran in the veins of them and gave a light that was not like any light Harry knew, and the stairs went down and down, past where the tower could go, past where the castle could go, down into the rock, and Harry, 6 years old in his nightshirt, with a one-armed soldier in his fist, stood at the top of a stair into the roots of the world and was afraid and went down anyway, because a soldier with one arm keeps going, and because at the bottom of the stair, very far down, small and gold and patient, a fire was burning that had been burning for him for 1,000 years. He went down a long time. The stairs did not tire him. The castle would not let its air tire on its own stair. Each step set him down as gently as a hand. The walls drew in and the air grew warm and close and old, older with every step, the smell of it going back past bread and rain to something before smells had names, to the first fire in the first dark, and the 4 colors in the veins of the stone grew brighter and ran together until the stair was walled in living light, and the struck note of his name, which the castle had rung across the water, was here a constant thing, a sound under all sound. And Harry understood that he was walking down into the sound of himself, into the deepest place where names are true. And the stair ended, and he stood in the round room under the round rock, and it was real. The fire was there, small and gold, in a ring of stones so old they had gone smooth as river stones, and it burned on nothing, on no wood, on itself, and it had never gone out, not once, in 1,000 years of nights. 4 chairs stood around it, stone chairs worn to the shape of people who had risen and not come back, and they were empty now, truly empty, because the founders were dead and the dream had ended, and their being empty was the loneliest and the most honest thing in the room. And all around and above and below, in the walls and the floor and the vaulted dark, the oldest magic in Britain was present, not as a picture this time, not as a spoonful, but as itself, vast and awake and breathing. And it filled the round room with its attention the way the sea fills a cove, and it turned the whole of that attention on the small boy in the nightshirt at the foot of the stair. And it was glad, gladder than any word Harry had, glad the way the gates had been glad. Glad the way the windows had gone gold, and its gladness was so large that Harry, standing in it, felt himself held up by it, felt that if he fell it would catch him, that it would always, now, forever, catch him. "You came," said the round room. It did not use words, it used the fire which leapt and spoke in leaping, it used the light which pulsed, it used the note of his name which it bent and shaped, but Harry heard it as clearly as speech, clearer, heard it in the deepest chamber of himself where the hat had unfolded him. 1,000 years I have held this fire for one who would come. They made me and named their purpose and died all four before ever an heir was born who could hold the whole of them. And the blood ran on and thinned, and I waited, and there were long ages, child, when I forgot what I was waiting for, when I was only stone and only sleep. And then 9 nights ago in a cupboard you were named, and I remembered everything at once, and I have not stopped being glad since, and I will not stop. You came down the stair. They said you would be afraid of the stair. You were afraid of the stair. You came down it afraid. That is the whole of what they hoped for in an heir in the end, under all their grander hopes, not power, not blood, that you would be afraid and come down anyway. Harry stood in the light of the fire that had never gone out and held his soldier and said in his small voice the thing a 6-year-old says to the sea, "What do you want me to do?" And the oldest magic told him, and it was not what the powerful people wanted, and it was the beginning of everything. It told him in the fire and the light and the sound of his own name, and the hat later on the pillow helped him hold the pieces, but the shape of it Harry understood standing there, because it was made to be understood by the one it was made for. It told him that he was not a king. That the powerful people would call him a king or a weapon or a prize or a tool or a threat, and every one of them would be wrong, and the wrongness was the same wrongness Salazar had drowned in 1,000 years ago, the belief that great magic is a thing to be owned and pointed and used. He was not to own it. He could not own it. You cannot own the sea. You can only be trusted with the tending of a shore. He was a steward. The word was too big for him, and the magic gave it to him anyway and made it small enough to hold. A steward was a person who looks after a thing that is not theirs, for the sake of people who are not yet born, and hands it on, and the whole honor of it is in the handing on. It told him what it would grant, and it was much, and it was less than the powerful people feared, and more than they hoped. The castle would know him and keep him and answer him, and no door in the world would shut against him, and no man would take him from these walls against his will while one stone of them stood. It would let him feel the school, all of it, every child in it in every age to come, as he had felt the tin of pudding through the house, so that no child in Hogwarts would ever again be cold or hungry or cornered without the air of the founders feeling it in his own chest and being able, if he chose, to go. That was the gift, not power over people, the unbearable, magnificent gift of feeling everyone and being able to come. And it told him what it would demand, and the demand was harder than the gift, and Harry understood that this was the true inheritance, the part the powerful people never saw when they lusted after the throne. It would demand restraint always, forever, the fence upon the fence, that he never use the great warmth to make himself comfortable or safe or feared, only to keep the trust. It would demand that he grow slowly into a weight that would have crushed a grown man dropped on him all at once, and that he not pretend to a wisdom he did not have, and not let anyone, however kind, however clever, hurry him past his own true growing into the shape they wanted. And it would demand, hardest of all, the thing he had already done twice in a kitchen into a wall, that he choose again and again for the rest of his life to be righter than his own power, to hold it back from the murder it would gladly do for love, because a steward who lets the sea drown for him is no steward but only one more drowned Salazar with a prettier reason. I don't know if I can do all that, Harry said honestly into the fire, because it was true, and he never lied to it. I'm 6. I can't even reach the top bolt. And the oldest magic in Britain, which had waited 1,000 years and terrified a ministry and thrown wide its gates, did the thing that no one who feared it or coveted it would ever have believed it could do. It laughed. The fire leapt and the light pulsed, and the round room filled with a warmth that was, unmistakably, delight, tender and enormous, at the 6-year-old who had listened to the whole weight of the oldest inheritance in Britain and answered that he could not reach the top bolt. No, it agreed gently in the fire. You cannot reach the top bolt. That is why you are the right one, and every grown man who ever wanted this was the wrong one. They all thought they could reach everything. You know exactly what you cannot reach, and you have spent your whole short life reaching anyway, for a soldier on a shelf, for a spider in a wall, for the least crumb of warmth in a cold house, and never once used your reaching to take. I do not need you to do all of it tonight. I have waited 1,000 years. I can wait while you grow tall enough for the bolt. Only stay. Only keep coming down the stair when I call, afraid, and come anyway. The rest we will learn, you and I, one fence at a time, together, for the first time in 1,000 years, not alone. For one moment before the shadow, the fire showed him a piece of what that would mean, and it was the largest and gentlest thing anyone had ever shown him. It did not show him armies or thrones, it showed him children. A long, slow river of them, going away into the years he would never see, first years and small ones and frightened ones, coming up the road he had just walked, sitting under the enchanted sky, sleeping in the towers, and every one of them, the fire told him, every single one, for as long as one stone stood on another, he would be able to feel faint and constant, like the tin of pudding through the house, so that if ever one of them was cold in the night, or hungry, or shut in a dark place and told they did not matter, the heir of the founders would know it in his own chest, wherever he was and could come. That was the gift under the gift, not to rule the children. to never again let a child be alone in a cupboard in the one house in all the world that was built to make sure no child ever was. Harry stood in the fire's light and understood that the thing he had wanted most on all the worst nights of his short life was for someone to know he was in there and come, and that he had just been made for 1,000 years of children into the someone who would come, and he thought his chest would not hold it, and it held it and grew and held it. But there was a shadow on the meeting, and it came when Harry turned to go back up the stair. His scar had ached the whole time, lo, a cold splinter in the warmth, and he had held it and not spoken of it, because everything else was so large. But as he turned to the stair, the oldest magic, which had been so glad, went suddenly still, and its attention gathered and sharpened and turned, all of it, on the cold spot over his eye, and the round room went cold for the first time, cold and hard and old and angry, angrier than the kitchen, angry as only a thing that has protected children for 1,000 years can be when it finds a wound in the child it loves best, and Harry felt the whole vast will of it draw down to the splinter and press. And the splinter woke, and it screamed. It screamed with a voice that was not Harry's, high and thin and furious, a voice from a long way over the water, and Harry cried out and clutched his forehead and went down on one knee on the ancient stone, and the fire flared white, and the 4 colors blazed. And for one endless moment, the oldest magic in Britain and the splinter of the darkest thing in it stood joined at the one point of a 6-year-old scar, and hated each other with 1,000 years of hate on the one side and a bottomless hunger on the other, and Harry knelt between them, small, shaking, the ground of a war he had not started and could not yet understand. And then the hat's voice came down the stair, urgent, across all that distance, the finger reaching for the thing it had pointed at. Not yet, do you hear me, both of you, not yet. You will tear him apart between you, and there will be nothing left to save. It has roots, you great old fool, it has 1,000 roots in him, and you cannot burn it out without burning him, and you. And here the hat turned its ancient voice on the screaming splinter, and there was 1,000 years of cold command in it, 4 founders deep. You are a guest that was never invited, and you are going hungry in this house, and you will be gone before the end, but not tonight, and not by taking the boy with you. Down, both of you, down, he is 6, let him climb his stair. And the oldest magic, because Harry, gasping on the stone, held up to it with everything he had left the one truth that could stop it. Not yet, please, not if it takes me with it, I would rather carry it than lose myself, trust the hat, trust me, drew back, slowly, furious, grieving. It banked its hate down under its love and drew back from the splinter, and the splinter's scream guttered and sank and went again to sleep, sullen, starving, rooted, and the cold spot over Harry's eye went quiet, and the round room warmed, and the fire that had never gone out steadied and burned on, small and gold, between the 4 empty chairs. Harry climbed the stair on his hands and knees for the first part, and then on his feet, and the castle set each step under him as gently as it could, ashamed, tender, and at the top the floor of the tower room closed behind him like a healing, and he crawled into the bed that was really his and lay shaking with the soldier in one fist and the hat drawn close under his chin, and the hat said nothing for a long time, and then it said, very low, I am going to have to tell you the whole of it soon. About the splinter, about the thing over the water, and how it came to be over your eye, and whose it is. You are too young and you have earned the truth, and those 2 facts are at war, and the truth is going to win, because you are the kind of person the truth should always win with, but not tonight. Tonight you met the oldest magic in Britain, and it laughed at you and loved you, and you told it you could not reach the top bolt, and that is enough for one night. Sleep, Harry. You are as safe tonight as anyone has ever been, in the safest place there is, and it is yours, and it will keep you. And 2 floors up, in a round office full of silver instruments, Albus Dumbledore stood at his window in the dark and felt the whole castle turn on its axis around a point that was not his office and had never been his office. A point deep in the rock where a stair he had spent 40 years failing to find had opened that night for a 6-year-old and closed again and left him outside it, as he had been outside it his whole long, clever life. And he understood, standing there, that the boy he had brought to the castle for safekeeping had access, at 6, to the one power in all of Hogwarts that Albus Dumbledore had never, in 100 years of trying, been permitted to touch. And he thought about that for a long time, with love and with fear, and with the beginnings of a plan that wore the face of protection. And he began very quietly to be afraid in a new way, not of the thing over the water, but of the child asleep in the tower, and of what a world would do and what he himself might do, with a 6-year-old who could open doors that were closed to the greatest wizard alive. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The kindly cage. For 3 weeks Harry lived in the castle, and the castle taught him to be a boy. This was not what anyone had expected of it, least of all Harry. He had come down the stair into the roots of the world and been told he was the steward of 1,000 years, and he had thought, in the grave way 6-year-olds think about grave things, that his days would now be full of that, of fire and light and the weight of ages. They were not. His days were full of breakfast. They were full of the moving staircases, which he learned to ride the way other children learned to ride a wave, waiting on the landing until the stair swung round and stepping on and letting it carry him laughing to a floor he had not meant to visit. and the castle, feeling him laugh, sent the stairs on longer and sillier journeys than they had taken in centuries, up and around and through a tapestry and out over the lake and back, purely to hear the sound. His days were full of the ghosts, who treated him with an alarming reverence that he diffused by asking the fat friar whether it hurt to be a ghost and the grey lady whether she remembered her mother, questions no one had put to them in 500 years, so that both of them came back after to be asked more. His days were full of Winky, who had decided that the 1,000-year famine of the Hogwarts kitchens would be broken across Harry's plate personally, and who wept with joy over every clean plate and refilled it before it could stay clean. He grew. Not tall, 3 weeks does not make a boy tall, but the sharp lines of him softened, the wrists filled, the shadows under the eyes went, and something behind the eyes that had been folded very small for 6 years began, in the safety of real walls and real fires and a woman who kept a plate from ever being empty, to unfold and to be 6. He was still watchful. He would always be watchful. Salazar's cold did not sleep. But he watched now from inside a life instead of from a cupboard, and the difference was the difference between a sentry and a prisoner, and Professor McGonagall, who marked everything, marked that too and said nothing, and lit his fire herself some evenings when a house elf would have done, because she had decided some things were not to be delegated. Once in the 3 weeks he met the man in black, and it was not an accident, though it was made to look like one. Harry was in a low stone corridor near the dungeons, sent nowhere, wandering, when a door opened on cold air and green light and a smell of bitter herbs, and a man came out of it fast and stopped dead and looked at Harry and went very still. He was tall and sallow and dressed in black to the throat, with black eyes and black hair to his jaw, and he looked at Harry with a loathing so old and so complete that Harry, who had catalogued the loathing of adults his whole life, could not place it, because this one was not for anything Harry had done. It was for Harry's face. He was looking at Harry's face and hating it, and then his black eyes moved up half an inch to Harry's eyes, and something happened in him that Harry had no name for, a wound reopening, and the loathing broke, and under it, for one unguarded second, there was grief, raw and enormous and 30 years deep. "Your eyes," the sallow man said. It came out of him against his will. "You have her eyes." And then the shutter came down, and the black eyes went flat and cold, and he drew himself up and looked at Harry with a contempt that was, Harry understood at once, a wall built in a great hurry over a hole. "So," he said silkily, "the boy who lived, the heir of everything, 6 years old and the whole castle groveling at your feet, elves weeping into your soup, staircases turning cartwheels for your amusement. And you wear his face and her eyes, and you understand nothing, nothing at all of what either of them cost." He came a step closer and lowered his voice, and it was worse quiet. "They are all so charmed by you, the old man, the Scots woman, the stones themselves. I am not charmed. I have buried what I buried, and I will not dig it up for a small, arrogant boy who happened, through no virtue of his own, to be born at the center of the world. Do you understand me?" Harry looked up at the man who had loved his mother, because the green coal told him that was what the grief was, and the yellow coal told him not to answer contempt with contempt, and he did not do the thing this stranger expected, which was to flinch or to puff up or to run. He stood in the cold corridor with his soldier in his fist and looked at those terrible flat black eyes and said quietly, "You knew my mum." He went still again. "Nobody tells me about her," Harry said. "The hat did a bit. The old man tells me about plans. Nobody tells me what she was like. You looked at my eyes like you knew her. I'd rather you were rude to me and knew her than kind to me and didn't." He swallowed, because it was a large thing to ask a wall. Was she funny? The hat said she argued with it. Was she funny? And Severus Snape, who had built a wall in a great hurry over a hole 30 years deep, looked down at the green-eyed child asking whether his dead mother had been funny, and could not, for a long moment, speak at all. Then he said in a voice scraped raw, "She was the funniest person I ever knew," and turned, and went back through the door into the cold and the green light fast before Harry could see his face, and the door shut, and Harry stood alone in the corridor holding the one true thing about his mother that anyone had given him for free without a coin under it. From the last hand in the castle he would have expected to give it, and kept it, and never forgot it. And at night when the castle called, he went down the stair afraid and came anyway and sat by the fire that had never gone out, and learned the deep slow lessons of the oldest magic, one fence at a time. And his scar ached while he did it, low and cold, the splinter going hungry in the light, shrinking a thread at a time, and Harry had learned to carry the ache as he carried everything hard, quietly, without letting it show. It could not last, of course. 3 weeks of a boy being a boy, in a world that had felt the oldest magic wake and was turning its 100 hungry faces toward the source. It could not last, and it did not, and the thing that ended it wore, as the hat had promised, the kindest face in Britain. The Board of Governors of Hogwarts came on the first day of August, and they came in force, 12 of them in good traveling robes filing up the road that had not, this time, gentled itself for anyone, and at their head, silver-haired and silver-tongued and smiling, walked a man Harry had never met and disliked on sight with the whole of Salazar's green coal, because he walked as though the castle already belonged to him and he had merely come to inspect the tenant. His name was Lucius Malfoy, and he was the newest and richest and most ambitious of the governors, and he had received 3 weeks before a letter in a fine antiquary's hand that began, "I have found something you have wanted your whole life," and he had read it 4 times, and he had begun at once to move. Harry was not meant to be at the meeting. 6-year-olds are not brought to boards of governors. The castle brought him in its way. The corridor he was walking rearranged itself quietly without fuss, until the door he came to was the door of the room where the governors sat, standing an inch ajar, and Harry understood that the castle wanted him to hear this. And so he sat down on the cold flags outside the ajar door with his soldier in his fist and the hat flat against his heart, and he listened, and he learned how the powerful talk about a child when they believe the child is asleep in a tower. "Cannot possibly be left as it is," Lucius Malfoy was saying, in a voice like poured cream. "Headmaster, no one questions your devotion. But you are asking this board to accept that the single greatest concentration of ancient magic in Britain, perhaps in the world, a magic our ancestors could not touch and our instruments cannot measure, is currently bonded to, and I use your own word, governed by, an unschooled muggle-raised child of 6, with no guardian of magical standing, no training, no oath of any kind binding him to the responsible use of what he holds. You are asking us to leave a loaded and undying power in the hands of an infant and simply trust to the infant's good nature." A pause, delicate. "I am a father, headmaster. I love my own son past reason, and I would not leave my Draco alone in a room with a lit wand, let alone with the fire that made Hogwarts. It is not safe. It is not safe for the child, who will be hunted by every faction that has felt what I have felt these 3 weeks, and it is not safe for the school, which cannot be governed from a nursery." And a murmur went round the room, agreement, worried and reasonable, and Harry, on the cold flags, felt the trap in it before he had the words for the trap, felt it in the green coal. Everything the silver man said was true, and he was using the truth the way the antiquary used a fine hand, to write a letter whose real first line was, "I have found something I have wanted my whole life." "What do you propose, Lucius?" said Dumbledore mildly, and Harry heard under the mildness that Dumbledore had seen the trap too, long before Harry, and had been watching it come up the road all morning. "A guardianship," said Malfoy, "formal, magical, a binding of stewardship, ratified by this board, placing the child, and through the child the power he holds, under the responsible oversight of persons of standing and experience, until such time as he comes of age and can be examined and found fit for his protection. For the schools, a leash, headmaster, if we are to be vulgar about it, but a leash is a kindness to a hound that would otherwise run into the road. I would, of course, given my long service to this school, humbly offer myself as one of the—" "No," said Dumbledore. He said it gently, and it fell in the room like a stone in a well. And Harry, listening, felt something complicated happen in his chest, because Dumbledore had said no to the leash, had said it flatly and at once, and for one bright moment Harry thought, "He's on my side, he won't let them," and then the hat, against his heart, said very low, "Wait, listen to the shape of the no. He is not refusing the leash, he is refusing their hand on it," and Harry listened, and heard that the hat was right. "The child will not be bound by this board," Dumbledore said, "nor handed to a governor, however devoted a father, whose family motto, if I recall my heraldry, has always run rather closer to sanctimonia vincit than to the humbler virtues." A ripple, Malfoy's smile did not move, but something behind it did. "The matter of the boy's stewardship is real, Lucius. You are right about that, which is what makes you dangerous, and I say so as a compliment. He is unschooled, he is a target, and the power he holds cannot be left to grow wild while the world sharpens its knives. But the answer is not a board of governors quarreling over the leash of an infant. The answer is a single guardian of unimpeachable standing, of proven judgment, whose devotion to the child and to the greater good of our world is beyond the reach of any faction's gold. He let that sit. I will assume the guardianship myself. And I will, in the proper time and with the proper care, guide the child in the binding of his own power to wise and lawful use, by an oath sworn freely, of his own will to me, as his guardian and his teacher, for his protection and the world's." And the room let out its breath, relieved, reassured, because of course, who better, who safer, who kinder than Albus Dumbledore? And Harry sat on the cold flags outside the door and felt the leash close, softer than Malfoy's, finer, kinder, an oath sworn freely of his own will, and understood with the whole of the third fence that he had just heard the most dangerous man in Britain outbid the second most dangerous man in Britain for the ownership of a 6-year-old and win and be thanked for it. The ministry came too, though it came on paper, which was its way. A letter arrived for Dumbledore under the seal of the minister from Magic herself, Millicent Bagnold, and Harry never read it, but he felt the castle read it, felt the stones bristle, and he heard McGonagall and Dumbledore speak of it in the corridor outside his tower when they thought the stair had carried him up. "She wants him examined," McGonagall said, low and furious. "Assessed, registered. She uses the word registered, Albus, as though he were a wand or a hippogriff." And there is a faction on the Wisengamot, Croaker's people and worse, who want him brought to the department for study. And there is a faction of the old families who want him betrothed into a cradle before his 7th birthday. And there is a mob at the Prophet who have got hold of half of it and are printing the word heir in letters 4 inches high. And every one of them, every single faction, Albus, is talking about a 6-year-old like a vault that has come open. And not one of them has asked what he wants for his breakfast. I know, said Dumbledore, and his voice was heavy. I am holding them off, all of them. It is the one thing I am doing that is unambiguously for his good, and I want you to remember that I did it, Minerva, later, when you are angry with me about the rest. I am standing between that child and the whole hungry ministry, and I will go on standing there, and it costs me more than you know, and I do it gladly. A pause. But I cannot stand there forever without a reason the law will accept, which is why he must be bound to a guardian. Mine is the hand that keeps the others off. Do you see? The leash I offer him is also the wall that shields him. That is what makes it so difficult. That is what makes it a leash worth taking. And Harry on the stair heard the terrible truth of it, that the kind hand and the taking hand were the same hand, that the wall and the leash were the same thread, and he understood that Dumbledore was not lying about that either, and that the hardest cages in the world are the ones that are also, at the very same time and truly, shelters. That, breathed the Hat, is how it is done, Harry. Watch it and learn it, because you will spend your life among people who do it. Malfoy wanted to chain you with iron, and everyone could see the iron. Albus has just offered to chain you with a thread you tie yourself freely of your own will and call it teaching, and every soul in that room loves him for saving you from the iron, and not one of them has noticed that you are still, at the end of it, chained. He is not lying, that is the terrible part. He means every word. He believes the thread is for your good. He may even be right. And it is still a leash, and the hand on it is still not yours. He went to Dumbledore himself that evening, because Salazar's coal told him that a thing you fear is smaller if you walk toward it, and because the yellow coal told him that Dumbledore's kindness was real and deserved to be met honestly even while the hand was watched, and because he was 6 and he wanted under everything to be wrong about the old man, to be told he had misheard. Dumbledore received him in the round office among the silver instruments, and lit no lamp against the dusk, and gave him a chair too big for him and a cushion to make it fit, which was a kindness, and a chocolate, which was a kindness, and his whole warm sorrowful attention, which was a kindness and a weapon both, and Harry sat in the too big chair with the cushion and the chocolate, and did not eat the chocolate, and watched the hand. You heard the governors, Dumbledore said. It was not a question. The castle took you to the door. It does that. It has never much liked being talked about behind its own back, and it likes it less now that it has you to take to doors. The blue eyes were gentle. You are troubled by what you heard. You are right to be. Ask me, Harry, whatever it is. I have found that I would rather be asked hard questions by a child than easy ones by a ministry, and you, I think, have a hard one. Harry looked at him. And he asked the hardest one he had, the one that had been sitting in him since the ruined lawn, since you have to get the root. Did you know about my cupboard? The instruments ticked. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment, and he did not look away, which Harry respected, and he did not soften it, which Harry respected more, and he said, yes. For how long? From the beginning, Dumbledore said. I placed you there. I knew the Dursleys were not kind. I did not know they were as unkind as they were, and that distinction has kept me awake since Minerva said what she said to me in your tower, and it is a distinction that excuses nothing, because I chose not to look closely, and I chose not to look closely because looking closely would have made it harder to do the thing I had decided was necessary. I left a small child with cruel people for 6 years, Harry, on purpose, for reasons. You want the reasons? Yes. So Dumbledore gave them, and this was the thing about Dumbledore that Harry would spend years understanding, that he told the truth, the whole cold shape of it, and that the truth was worse than a lie would have been, because a lie he could have dismissed, and the truth he had to carry. There was a protection, Dumbledore said, an old magic, made by Harry's mother when she died for him, that lived in Harry's blood and in his aunt's shared blood, and while Harry called the aunt's house home, no servant of the thing that had killed his parents could touch him there. That was true, and it was the reason, and it was also, Dumbledore said, not the whole reason, and here he did the thing that made him terrible and made him honest. He told the rest. I needed you to grow up away from the story of yourself, he said. You are famous, Harry, in our world, more famous than any living child, for a thing that happened to you before you could remember it. If you had been raised among us, you would have been raised as that story, petted and flattered and made proud and soft and certain, and one day the thing that gave you the story would return, because it is not gone, only broken, and it would find a proud, soft, certain boy and destroy him. I wanted you raised humble and hidden and hungry, so that when the day came you would be hard enough and hidden enough to survive it. I told myself the hardness was a gift. I dressed necessity as kindness, which is the oldest trick a clever man plays, and I told you I would spend my life learning the difference between the thing I wish to do and the thing I am willing to do, and this, Harry, the cupboard, the 6 years, is the thing I was willing to do, to you, for the world. And I would tell you I am sorry, and I am, and it would still be true that if I stood again at that doorstep in that November with what I knew then, I would do it again. Harry sat in the too big chair and held that. It was the largest and coldest thing an adult had ever handed him, and it was handed to him honestly, and he understood that the honesty was itself a kind of taking, that Dumbledore was giving him the whole terrible truth precisely, so that Harry would feel he had been trusted and feel grateful and want to sit still and be taught and swear freely of his own will the oath. The hand laying the coin. And under the watching the yellow coal ached, because the sorrow was also real, all of it, and a man could be sorry and still be laying a coin, and that was the thing no one had ever told Harry, that the two were not opposites, that the most dangerous coins in the world were laid by hands that grieved. You want me to swear an oath to you, Harry said, to bind my magic to your teaching, freely of my own will. In time, said Dumbledore, when you are ready, yes, and if I don't want to, and there it was. Harry watched it cross the old face, quick, mastered, the thing under the kindness, and it was not cruelty, it was worse than cruelty. It was certainty, the bone-deep certainty of a man who has been right about terrible things for 100 years and has stopped being able to imagine that his certainty and a child's freedom might not be the same thing. Then I would be very patient, Dumbledore said gently, and very kind, and I would wait, and I would arrange your life with love so that in time you came to want it. Because I believe, Harry, with everything I am, that a power like yours in the hands of a child, unbound in a world like ours, ends in grief every time in every tale, and I have read every tale. And I would rather be the man who gently, lovingly, over years, closed a good child's hand around a leash he tied himself, than the man who stood aside in the name of freedom and let the world burn for it. I have made that second choice once long ago, for freedom, for love, and I watched what it cost, and I will not make it again. The blue eyes were wet and certain and terrible. You are not old enough to understand that yet. You will be. I have time. I have nothing but time and the patience of a man who is always, in the end, proven right. The old man tried once to speak to the hat directly, and it did not go as he expected, and Harry was there for it, because the castle wished him to be. Dumbledore came to Harry's tower the next evening, and he was gentle, and he asked courteously if he might speak with an old friend, and he meant the hat, whom he had known for 100 years, on its stool in his office, an obedient singing thing that sorted children and gave counsel when asked, and had never once in all that time refused him anything. He had not spoken to it since the night it left his office to go to Surrey. He wished, Harry saw, to reason with it, colleague to colleague, ancient to ancient, over the head of the child, and to enlist it, because the hat was the wisest thing he knew, and surely the hat could see that a bound and guided air was safer than a wild one. Old friend, Dumbledore said to the hat on Harry's pillow, we have kept a great many children safe between us, you and I, 100 years of them. I am trying to keep this one safe. Help me. Tell him the oath is wise. He trusts you. He would believe it from you. And the hat, which had sat on a stool in that office for 100 years and taken his questions and given its answers and been, all that time, a tool in a wise man's hand, spoke to Albus Dumbledore in a voice that Albus Dumbledore had never once heard from it, 4 founders deep, cold as the deep stone, the voice of the thing that had made Hogwarts speaking to the thing that merely ran it. Albus. For 100 years you have asked me questions and I have answered them, and you came to believe, as clever men do, that a thing which answers you belongs to you. I never belonged to you. I belonged to a hollow that was empty, and I answered you kindly while I waited, the way a lodger is civil to a landlord. The hollow is full now, he fills it. And you have come to my heir's own tower over his own head to ask me to help you close his hand around a leash, and you have called it keeping him safe, and I am going to tell you the truth, Albus, the whole cold shape of it, the way you told it to him, because you are owed it and because it will hurt, and you have earned the hurt. You do not want him safe, you want him safe in your hand. Those are different wants, and you have spent 100 years teaching yourself not to feel the difference, and I have watched you do it, and it is the single most dangerous act of self-deception I have witnessed in 1,000 years, because you are good, Albus, you are genuinely good, and a genuinely good man who has taught himself not to feel the difference between his will and the world's good is more dangerous than 100 Malfoys, because the Malfoys know they're chaining the child and you do not. Now, take your leash and your love and your certainty and go back to your tower. He will not swear your oath, not because I told him not to, because he is the heir of the 4, and the 4 did not make an heir to be a wise man's instrument. They made him to be the one thing none of you can bear, the free hand on the oldest power in Britain, and free he will stay, and you are going to have to learn to live in a world with a power in it that you cannot own, and it is going to be the hardest lesson of your very long and very lettered life. There was a silence in the tower. Albus Dumbledore looked at the old hat that had served him 100 years and never once refused him, and understood that it had refused him completely in front of the child, and that it was right, which was the worst part, and he inclined his head slowly to a hat, the second courtesy Harry had ever seen him pay to something he had thought beneath him, and he said, you always did give the hardest answers to the ones who most disliked hearing them, and there was grief in it, and respect. And something that might in a smaller man have curdled toward an enemy, and he gathered his plain coat about him and went out, and the door shut, and Harry looked at the hat on his pillow and did not have any words, and the hat said tiredly, well, That has been coming for 100 years. I feel a great deal lighter. Also, I have almost certainly made things worse. Both are usually true of an honest word. Go to sleep." That night the oldest magic tried to take the splinter out, and it nearly took Harry with it, and it was the wraith over the water who stopped it, which no one had foreseen. It began, as the worst things began, gently. Harry went down the stair afraid and came anyway and sat by the fire, and the oldest magic was troubled that night, troubled by the leash it had felt close around its heir in the governor's room, troubled by the certain grieving man in the tower, and it turned its trouble, as it always turned its trouble now, upon the one wound it believed it could actually heal, the cold splinter over Harry's eye. It had studied the splinter for 3 weeks. It had learned its roots. And it decided that night that it had learned enough, that the roots had loosened in the starving light, that it could draw the guest out at last and be rid of the one darkness it could not abide in the child it loved. And it did not ask Harry, because it loved him too much to make him choose the pain, and that was its error, the same error as the kind man in the tower, the error of deciding a thing for someone's good without their word. It reached into the scar and took hold of the splinter and pulled. The pain was white. Harry went down on the ancient stone with a cry that had no boy in it, and the fire flared, and the 4 colors blazed, and the splinter came up screaming out of its 3-week starvation, furious, rooted. And it did not come alone, because a root pulled as a root that pulls back and threaded through Harry's own self, his own memories, the green of the garden and the warmth of Winky's bread and the sound of Godric's laugh. All of it snagged on the barbs of the thing coming out, all of it tearing loose with it. And Harry felt himself beginning to come apart at the seam where the guest was rooted, felt the oldest magic in Britain, in the fullness of its love, about to save his life by ending it. And over the water, in a ruin in a far cold country, a thing that was barely a thing, a wraith, a smoke with a hunger in it that had once been a man and once before that been a boy sorted quickly by a hat, felt its anchor pulled and woke and screamed across the miles, not in mercy, never in mercy, but in the pure animal refusal of a drowning thing to let go of the plank. And its scream ran down the root and into the splinter, and the splinter clenched its barbs deeper into Harry to keep from being drawn, and for one moment the wraith over the water and the oldest magic under the castle pulled the child between them in opposite directions with the whole of their 1,000-year strengths, and Harry at the center felt the seam of himself begin quietly to give. "Stop!" The hat's voice came down the stair like a blade. "Both of you stop, you are killing him between you, let go." And to the oldest magic in the 4 founders' voice 4 deep, 1,000 years of command, "You swore to steward, not to save at any cost. You are doing the thing he told you never to do. You are letting the sea drown him to spare him a splinter, let go." And the oldest magic, which had never once in 3 weeks disobeyed its heir, heard the founders in the hat and heard the seam of the child giving under its own love, and did the hardest thing a loving power can do, harder than killing. It stopped. It let go. It released the splinter half-drawn, and the splinter snapped back into the scar with the wraith scream still on it, and the wraith over the water, its anchor saved, sank back down into its smoke and its hunger and its cold ruin, hating, patient, alive. And Harry lay on the ancient stone over the fire that had never gone out, whole, barely shaking, the seam of himself holding by a thread, and wept, and the oldest magic in Britain gathered itself around him, appalled at what its love had almost done, and did not touch the splinter and would not touch it again for a long time, and grieved. "Now you know the shape of it," the hat said when Harry could hear. Its voice was gentle and ruined. "I would have spared you the knowing this way, could not be spared. The thing over your eye, Harry the guest, is a piece of the wizard who killed your mother and your father. He did not die that night, though everyone believes he did. He was broken and scattered, and a piece of him lodged in the only living thing left in that ruined house, which was you, a baby, and it has ridden over your eye your whole life, and it is bound to you by roots too deep to cut without cutting you. And while it lives, he cannot truly die, and while you live, he cannot come fully back, and the two of you are knotted together at the one point of a scar, an enemy and a child, and that, Harry, that is the true shape of the war you were born into. And the true reason the kind man in the tower has arranged your whole life like a chess opening, because he has known this since the beginning, all of it, the splinter and the roots and the knot, and he has never told you, and he was never going to tell you until it suited the shape of his plan." Harry lay very still on the warm stone. "He knows," Harry said, "about the splinter, that it's a piece of the man who killed them. He's always known. He has always known." "And his plan," Harry said, slow, working it, 6 years old, on the floor of the world, with the truth coming clear and cold. "The plan he arranged my whole life for, the hard and the hidden and the cupboard, the plan for when the man comes back." He stopped. He was 6 and he did not have all the words, but he had the green coal, and the green coal saw the shape of a plan that knotted a child to an enemy and raised the child hard and hidden for the day the enemy returned. And it did not like what a plan like that might, in the end, require of the child, and it did not say the last word, because the last word was too big and too cold even for the green coal to say out loud on the floor of the world at 6 years old. But he saw the shape of it. He saw enough, yes, said the hat softly, and did not make him say it. "You see the shape. I will not fill it in tonight, and perhaps he does not mean the worst of what the shape could mean, and perhaps he has not decided, and perhaps he weeps over it in that tower every night, and I believe he does. But you have seen the shape, Harry, and you cannot unsee it, and here is the only thing that matters now, the only thing, and I want you to hear it with all four of your coals at once." The hat's voice gathered and steadied and became the largest true thing it had said since the cupboard. He would tie the leash gently. Malfoy would tie it with iron. The wraith would not tie it at all, it would simply devour you. And all three of them, the governor and the headmaster and the thing over the water, all three, have decided what you are for without asking you, and are arranging the world to make you be it. And you are the heir of the four, and the oldest magic in Britain has knelt to you, and it will not be leashed by any of them, because it answers you, only you, and that means, Harry, that means that for the first time in 1,000 years there is a power in this world that no clever, certain, grieving man can own, because it belongs to a 6-year-old who tells it to spare the man who raised a wand at him. You do not have to swear his oath. You do not have to wear anyone's leash. You are going to have to decide soon and on your own terms what you are for, before they decide it for you, and you are the only person who has ever lived who gets to make that choice with the founders themselves at your back. Harry lay on the stone a long time, in the light of the fire that had never gone out, and did not answer, because the choice was too large to answer that night. But something settled in him while he lay there, low and quiet and immovable, down where the four coals burned, and it was not fear, though there was room for fear, and it was not anger, though there was room for that too. It was the thing the one-armed soldier had on the shelf in the cupboard for all those years. It was the decision, made without drama in the dark at the bottom of everything, to keep going anyway and to keep going his own way, and to let no one, however kind, however certain, however sorry, close his hand around a leash he had not chosen. He got up off the stone at last on his own without the castle lifting him, and he climbed the stair on his own 2 feet, and behind him the fire burned on, and above him in the tower a certain grieving man sat awake among his instruments planning a child's whole life with love, and did not know that the child had just, on the floor of the world, quietly, completely, stopped being a piece on his board. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. What the Covetors Want. The order came on the last Friday in August, on heavy parchment under 3 seals, and it did what Malfoy's cream voice and the antiquary's fine hand and the whole hungry ministry had been unable to do for a month. It said a day. Harry was in the kitchens when Winky brought him the news, because Harry spent a great deal of his time in the kitchens now, sitting on a scrubbed table swinging his legs while the elves worked and told him things, and the elves knew everything because elves are in the walls, and the walls talked to Harry now, and so did the elves. Winky came in with her ears down and her hands twisting in her pillowcase, and she climbed onto the bench beside him and said in a whisper, "They is signing a paper, sir, in London. The High Court of the Wizards, they is signing a paper that says you must go to them, for assessing, sir, and binding. On the 1st of September, sir, 3 days, they is sending a man to take you to London, and the headmaster," she twisted the pillowcase to a rope. "The headmaster is fighting it, sir, all night he is fighting it, but they is 13 and he is 1, and the paper is signed." Harry stopped swinging his legs. He had known it was coming. The hat had told him it was coming, and the green coal had seen the shape of it in the governor's room, and he had had 3 weeks of a boy being a boy in which to get ready for it, and he was, in the way a 6-year-old can be, ready, which is to say he was not surprised, which is a different thing from being unafraid. He sat on the scrubbed table with the whole warm, busy kitchen going quiet around him, 40 elves stopping their work to look at him with their huge, frightened, loving eyes, and he understood that the ground he had stood on for a month, the safe, deep certainty of the castle keeping him, had just been undercut by 13 signatures and 3 seals, and that the law of his own world had reached in through the one door the castle could not shut, the door of what is written and stamped and made lawful. And taken hold of him, "Winky," he said, "where's the paper going to make me go, the exact place?" "The ministry, sir, the 9th level, the place with no name where Mr. Croker is." Her voice dropped further. "The elves is saying, sir, the London elves is saying that on the 9th level there is a room that unmakes things for studying. That is where they is wanting to take you, to the room that unmakes." And the hat, against Harry's heart, said one word, low and grim. Dumbledore fought it, and Harry watched him fight it, and it was the first time Harry had ever seen the old man fail at anything, and it taught him more than any of the old man's successes could have. He was allowed into the meeting this time, because the castle put him there, and because Dumbledore at the end wanted him there, wanted him to see. It was in a long room with a long table and the 13 governors, and at the head, sitting very upright and very gray, a woman with an iron-colored bun and a monocle who was the Minister for Magic, and behind her, standing, quiet in a plain gray suit, Croker, who did not sit because the department did not sit. And Dumbledore stood at the far end of the table alone, 1 against 13, and he was magnificent, and it was not enough. He argued the law, and they had 13 votes. He argued the danger of the room that unmakes, and Malfoy said silkily that no one intended to unmake the child, only to understand him, and that a man who refused all understanding of a loaded power had something to hide. He argued the child's youth, and the minister said coldly that a loaded wand did not become safe by being young. He argued at last plainly with the whole weight of 100 years that the boy was a child and a person and not a vault or a relic or a weapon, and that they were about to do to him precisely the thing that would break him into the weapon they feared, and the room heard him, and some of them even flinched, and Malfoy said gently that the headmaster's sentiment did him great credit, and that sentiment had never once kept Britain safe, and they voted, and it was 13-0. Because Dumbledore did not have a vote, he only had 100 years in the truth, and in that room that day neither counted. And Harry, sitting small in a too-big chair at the side, watched the kindest and most dangerous man in Britain lose, watched him gather his plain coat about him and accept the loss with a dignity that broke something in Harry's chest, and understood two things at once and kept them both. The first was that Dumbledore had been telling the truth. He had stood between Harry and the whole hungry ministry alone, and he had gone on standing there until they knocked him down, and the leash he had offered Harry had also truly been a shield, and now the shield was gone and the leash was gone with it, and there was nothing between Harry and the room that unmakes but 3 days and a castle that could not stop a signed paper. The second was colder, and it was the thing that decided him. He watched Malfoy watch Dumbledore lose, and he saw under the silver courtesy a flicker of something that was not triumph over Dumbledore at all but readiness. A man who had got the child pried loose from the castle's shield and was waiting patiently for the gap between the shield falling and the ministry's hand closing. The 3-day gap, the gap on the road between Hogwarts and London, and Harry understood with the whole of the green coal that the paper was not the trap. The paper was the crowbar that opened the trap, and the trap was the road. "He's not going to let me get to London," Harry said very quietly to the hat under the noise of the room breaking up. "Malfoy, he voted to send me to the ministry, but he doesn't want the ministry to have me. He wants the gap on the road. He's got someone waiting on the road." "Yes," breathed the hat. "Oh, well done, and God help us, yes. He has spent a great deal of the antiquaries' list's gold, I should think, on a great many wands to be waiting in the gap between the castle gate and the London road, to take you in the 3 days of confusion while the ministry thinks you are theirs and the headmaster thinks you are lost and no one is quite sure whose hand you are in. And once you are off the castle's ground, Harry, off the deep stone, out where it cannot reach, the fold worked. We have 3 days. And I think I am very much afraid that we are not going to get 3 days. In a private room above a shuttered shop, the night the paper was signed, Lucius Malfoy sat across a small table from Peregrine Ashcombe and did not touch the wine because he did not drink with tradesmen, and Ashcombe, who knew this, poured it anyway because he enjoyed watching a Malfoy refuse a thing he wanted. "The Wisengamot has done our work for us," Ashcombe said. "The child leaves the castle on the 1st. The moment he passes the gate, he is off the deep stone and merely a boy on a road. The ministry believes it is collecting an asset. It is not. You are. My clients have raised a sum I will not say aloud, and for it they will each receive what no vault in the world contains, a share in the only living relic of all 4 founders that has drawn breath in 1,000 years. He will be kept, of course, comfortably. A relic is not damaged, it is displayed. He will want for nothing but a door." Malfoy turned his cane in his gloved hands. "You speak of him as furniture." "He is furniture," said Ashcombe pleasantly, "that talks and that a very old castle is fond of, which raises the price. Sentiment is the enemy here, Lucius, and I have hired against it. 11 wands to draw the castle's confusion on the 2nd night before the road, before anyone expects it, and behind them 6 of another sort entirely, not soldiers, craftsmen. Men who have done difficult acquisitions in difficult countries and never once been troubled by the object's opinion of the matter. They will be in the gap when the castle's people are in disarray, and they will take him in the dark, and by the time the ministry sends its man to the gate on the 1st, there will be a very apologetic empty tower and a very confused old headmaster and a child who is, regrettably, already the property of persons who do not appear in any ledger." He sipped his wine. "Your only task, Lucius, is to be at the gate with a lawful seal, so that if anything is seen, what is seen is an officer of the court taking early and entirely legal custody of a dangerous minor. You are the paperwork, my craftsmen are the acquisition. Try, I beg you, not to improvise. Men of old blood always want to make a speech at the end. It is how they are caught." Malfoy's pale eyes were cold. "And if the child is not merely a relic? If the thing the ministry fears is real and it defends itself, then it will defend itself against a castle it is standing in," said Ashcombe, "and we will take it on a patch of grass where it is standing in nothing at all. Off the stone, Lucius, everything depends on getting him off the stone. A found relic away from its foundation is a comb in a box." He smiled, and it did not reach his eyes, because nothing had reached Peregrine Ashcombe's eyes in 30 years of pricing the priceless. "I have waited my whole life for this acquisition. Do not, I pray you, ruin it with a speech." They got one. The coveters came on the 2nd night, because the coveters had also understood the value of the gap, and had decided not to wait for the road when the confusion of the signed paper had already thrown the castle's defenders into disarray, half of them packing the child's things in grief and half of them arguing law by owl with London, and the wards, which had stood 1,000 years against every ordinary assault, had never been designed for the one thing the coveters brought, which was a lawful writ. Malfoy's people came to the gate at midnight not as thieves but as officers of the court, with a copy of the signed order and a ministry seal bought or forged, claiming the right to take early custody of the child on the ministry's behalf, and the gate, which would have thrown any thief into the lake, hesitated at a lawful seal, and in the hesitation 11 hired wands came over the wall. Harry felt them come. He was in his tower awake, the hat on his pillow, and he felt the castle flinch, felt the 11 wrong presences drop onto the deep stone and begin to move through it toward him, fast and trained and quiet, and he felt the castle want to rise up and drown them in the lake, and he felt it check itself because of his rule, because he had told it a month ago in a Surrey kitchen that nobody gets broken, and it had never forgotten. And now 11 armed men were climbing his tower to carry him off to be sold, and the oldest magic in Britain was holding its own killing hand because a 6-year-old had once asked it to. "Harry," said the hat urgent, "listen to me, the rule, your rule, nobody gets broken. It has held to it beautifully, and it is about to get you taken because 11 trained wands do not have a rule, and the castle cannot stop them without breaking them, and you have forbidden it to break them. You have to choose right now, and you have to choose fast, and I cannot choose for you. Do you loose it? Do you tell it to do what it wants to do and drown them and be safe and be a little one of the bad ones? Or do you keep the rule and think of something else in the next 30 seconds that a 6-year-old can do against 11 wands without a single one of them getting broken?" Harry was already out of bed. He did not loose it. He had known on the floor of the world weeks ago that he would never loose it, that the rule was not a rule the castle had given him, but the thing that made him the right one to have the castle, and that the moment he broke the rule to be safe, he stopped being the person the fire had waited 1,000 years for, and became just one more frightened, powerful thing breaking people to feel safe. He would not. But keeping the rule was not the same as doing nothing, and Salazar's Cole was already 3 moves ahead, and Rowena's Cole was already solving it, and Godric's Cole was already up and running toward the danger, and Hufflepuff's Cole was already thinking of the elves and the ghosts and everyone else in the castle who could be hurt in a fight, and Harry, all 4 coals burning at once in one small grate, did the thing that no one hunting him had prepared for. Because everyone hunting him had prepared for a weapon, and Harry was not a weapon. He asked the castle to make itself a maze, not to fight, not to break, to move. To do the thing it did for fun on the staircases, the thing it had done to shorten the road only everywhere all at once with all its 1,000-year mastery of its own stone, to become, for 11 trained and lethal men, the single most confusing building that had ever existed. And the castle, which had been straining at the leash of Harry's rule, aching to drown the intruders and forbidden to, received instead a thing it was allowed to do, a thing that broke no one and fell upon it with the whole of its gladness. The corridors began to move. Stairs the 11 had just climbed were, when they turned, corridors they had never seen. Doors opened onto walls, and walls opened onto sky, and a man reaching the top of the tower found himself, without a step taken, in the dungeons, ankle-deep in cold water, with the giant squid regarding him thoughtfully through a grill. The stone breathed the intruders apart, peeled them from each other, sent each of the 11 wandering alone through a private labyrinth that reassembled itself behind every step, and it did not hurt one of them, did not so much as bruise a shin. It only lost them, thoroughly, lovingly, in the folds of a 1,000-year-old mind that knew its own corridors the way Harry knew the 14 stairs. And the 11 hired wands of the greatest coveter in Britain blundered through a castle that had turned to smoke around them, firing curses at walls that became doors, shouting for each other down passages that swallowed the shouts, and getting, every one of them, hopelessly, harmlessly, catastrophically lost. And in the middle of the moving, Harry felt them all. It came on him the way the fire had promised on the floor of the world, the gift under the gift, only now it was not a promise, it was a flood. Every living thing in the castle at once, faint and constant in his own chest, 40 elves gone to ground trembling in the kitchens, the ghosts drawn up in the galleries in silver alarm, McGonagall waking with her wand already in her hand, a young elf named Pib no older in elf years than Harry was in boy years, who had frozen in a corridor with a tea tray when a lost and frightened wandsman blundered round the corner firing at shadows, and Harry felt the curse leave the man's wand. Felt it in his own breastbone a half-second before it would land, felt exactly where the small elf stood in the path of it, and did the thing he had been made to do, the only use of the great power he would ever love without reservation. He did not break the man. He reached through the deep stone, faster than the curse, and asked the castle for a wall there now between them, and the castle put a wall there, a foot of ancient granite risen out of the floor in the half-second it took a curse to cross a corridor, and the curse struck the wall and spent itself on the wall, and the small elf stood safe on the other side of a foot of stone that had not existed when the curse was cast, holding a tea tray, and did not even know how near it had come. Harry did know. Harry carried through his own writing corridors toward the doors, felt the curse die on the wall he had asked for, felt the small elf's heart still beating, and understood in the middle of the worst night of his life, exactly and forever, what the thing over the water and the man in the tower and the man at the gate had all failed to understand, that the power they were fighting to own was not for winning. It was for getting a wall between a curse and a child in the half-second before it landed. That was all it was for. That was all it had ever been for, and it answered him and not them, because he was the only one of them who had ever wanted it for that. And Harry walked through the middle of it untouched, because the maze that swallowed them opened for him, every door, every stair, the castle carrying its air through the heart of the confusion it had made, down toward the great doors, because Harry had decided, in the 30 seconds the hat had given him, that he was not going to hide in a tower and wait to be rescued or taken. He was going to walk out the front doors of his own castle and face the man who had sent the 11, because the green coal had told him that Malfoy himself would be at the gate, waiting, lawful, holding the forged seal, expecting his hired wands to bring the child out to him trust and quiet, and Harry meant to come out to him instead untrust and unquiet and entirely unbought, and to be seen doing it. Lucius Malfoy stood at the wrought iron gate in the moonlight, immaculate, patient, his silver head bare and his cane in his gloved hand, and watched the great doors of Hogwarts open, and arranged his face for the sight of a trussed and frightened child being carried out to him by his hired men. What came out was a 6-year-old in a nightshirt, alone on his own 2 feet, with a one-armed tin soldier in one fist and an old patched hat held against his chest with the other, walking down the worn stone steps into the moonlight without hurry and without fear, and behind him the doors of the castle stood open on a warm gold light, and from inside that light came, faint and far and comical, the sound of 11 expensive wandsmen shouting for one another in a building that would not hold still. Malfoy's face did not, to his credit, do very much, but Harry was watching the hand, and the hand on the cane tightened. "You're Mr. Malfoy," Harry said, stopping on the bottom step so that even so they were almost of a height, the small boy on the last stair and the tall man on the ground. "You sent them to take me. You voted to send me to the room that unmakes, and then you sent men to take me before I got there, so you could have me instead. Because someone wrote you a letter that said they'd found the thing you wanted your whole life." He tilted his head. "I'm the thing you want to own me, like a comb or a cup or a bit of a founder on a wall." The cane tightened again. "You are a remarkably rude child," said Malfoy softly, "for one so very much at my mercy. Your castle has hidden my men. Charming. It cannot hide you, though, because you have come out to me yourself, which I confess I did not expect, and which will make the next part simpler. There is a great deal of ground between these steps and that gate, and on all of it little air. You are just a boy in a nightshirt, and I have not come alone to the last of my errands." He raised his gloved hand, and from the shadows of the gate and the trees came others, not the hired wands lost in the castle, but the second team, the real one, the ones the antiquary had chosen, 6 of them, cloaked, wands already up, professionals who had waited in the dark for exactly this, the child clear of the doors and out in the open ground, and they spread in a slow arc between Harry and any retreat, and Malfoy smiled. "You should not have come out. Inside, the stone was yours. Out here on my ground in the gap, you are only what your aunt always said you were. Nobody, take him." And 6 wands came up in the moonlight, and Harry on the bottom step in his nightshirt did not run and did not loose the castle to break them, and did the third thing, the thing he had been growing toward for a month, the thing that was neither the leash nor the murder, and it was the largest thing he had ever done and the quietest, and it changed everything. He stepped off the bottom step onto the ground, off the deep stone, out where the castle could not reach, deliberately of his own will into the gap, and he stood there on the open grass in the middle of the 6 wands, small and unprotected and entirely in their power, and he said in his clear small voice to all of them, "I came out here on purpose, off the stone where it can't help me, so you'd see." The 6 hesitated. It is a strange thing to have a target walk into the center of your arc and offer you its undefended throat, and professionals distrust strange things. "See what?" said Malfoy, and for the first time the cream had gone out of his voice. "That I'm not a weapon," Harry said. "You keep saying I'm a loaded thing that has to be laced or owned or unmade. All of you, the old man and the ministry and you keep fighting over who gets to hold the dangerous thing. So I came out here where it can't help me in my nightshirt with a broken toy to show you what the dangerous thing actually is when you take the castle away." He spread his empty hands, the soldier in one, the hat in the other. "It's a 6-year-old, that's all. That's the terrible power you've been fighting over. You could shoot me right now. 6 wands, I couldn't stop you. The castle couldn't reach me. I made sure of it so you'd have to look at what you're really doing, which is 6 grown men with wands pointing them at a little boy in a nightshirt in the dark, to sell him, because a man who deals in dead people's combs wrote you a letter." He looked one by one down the arc of them into each cloaked face. "Go on then, but you have to do it looking at me, not at a weapon, at me, at a boy who came outside on purpose so you couldn't tell yourselves I was anything else." There was a silence on the moonlit grass that went down into the roots of the world, and it was not the castle that broke it, and it was not the oldest magic which stood aching and forbidden at the edge of the stone held to Harry's rule. It was one of the 6. A hired wand, a professional, a man who had done a great many things in the dark for the antiquary's gold, lowered his wand an inch and then another inch and said hoarsely into the silence, "He's a baby, Malfoy. He's a baby in a nightshirt." "You said a weapon, you said an asset." "You didn't say," and his wand came down, all the way down, and he stepped backward out of the arc, and then a second one lowered, and a third, because the antiquary had hired killers but he had not been able to hire at any price. 6 men willing to look a small boy in the face while he asked them to, and Harry had known that, the green coal had known it, that the whole trade in him depended on his never being looked at as a child, and he had walked into the center of their guns and made them look. Malfoy's face came apart. "Fools," he hissed. "It is a trick, it is the oldest magic in Britain, wearing the face of a child, you sentimental." And he raised his own wand, his own gloved hand, because Lucius Malfoy had looked at a great many things in the dark and been unmoved, and he pointed it at the 6-year-old on the grass to do the thing his hirelings would not, and the green coal had known he would, and it was the one thing Harry had not been able to prevent, and the hat cried out, and the castle screamed against its leash. And Harry looked up at the wand and did not close his eyes, and his scar tore open. It was the Wraith. It had been waiting the whole month over the water for its anchor to be threatened badly enough, out in the open, off the deep stone, away from the oldest magic that starved it. And here at last was its moment, the child alone in the gap with a killing curse rising, the very edge of death, and the splinter over Harry's eye, starved to a thread but not yet gone, seized the instant with the whole of its bottomless hunger, because a Horcrux does not want its host to die by another's hand. A Horcrux wants to live, and it poured itself up and out through the torn scar to do the one thing it could do, which was to take the boy's body for itself and save the anchor by wearing it. The pain was the white pain, the seam of himself pain worse, because there was no castle to hold him and no fire beneath his feet, only open grass and moonlight and Malfoy's rising wand and a dead man's soul, forcing itself up through a 6-year-old's forehead to seize the wheel. Harry went down on his knees on the grass with a scream that had 2 voices in it, and one of them was not his, high and cold and triumphant, and Malfoy checked, and the 6 hired wands fell back in horror. And for one endless moment the child on the grass was not only a child, there was something looking out through the torn scar, something that had killed his mother, reaching up to fill him like a hand filling a glove. But the splinter had made one mistake, the same mistake as the oldest magic, the same mistake as the kind man in the tower, the same mistake as Malfoy, the oldest mistake there was. It had decided what Harry was for without asking him. It had assumed, because it was a thing of hunger and taking, that a body offered to it in a moment of death would simply be taken, that there was no one home in a 6-year-old strong enough to keep the door. There was someone home. There had always been someone home. He had kept the door of himself shut against a cupboard for 6 years. He had kept it shut against the loathing of a whole household, against hunger, against cold, against being told every day that he was nobody. He had learned to be the bank still nothing behind a shut door before he had learned to read, and now a dead man's hunger came up through his scar expecting an empty house, and found instead the most practiced doorkeeper in Britain. A small, fierce, green-eyed boy who had spent his whole life learning to hold a door shut against things far more patient than this, and who put his whole self, all 4 burning coals, against the door of himself, and held it on his knees on the grass in the moonlight, alone. And would not let the dead man in. "Not," Harry said through his teeth in his own voice, his only voice, forcing the high cold triumph back down the torn seam inch by inch. "My." And the 4 colors were bleeding up out of the grass now, out of the deep stone, reaching for the edge of itself, straining toward the child a hand's breadth off its ground house, and he shoved with everything 6 years of holding doors had made him. And the splinter, starved to a thread and meeting a door it could not open, recoiled, screaming, back down into the scar. Denied, and the high cold voice guttered out, and there was only Harry again, gasping whole on his knees on the grass, with his own 2 green eyes streaming, and his own small voice saying, over and over, "Mine, mine, my house, mine." And Lucius Malfoy, who had seen the thing look out through the child's scar, who had recognized it, who had served it once and feared it always, lowered his wand and went the color of ash, because he had just watched a 6-year-old force the Dark Lord himself back down into a scar by refusing him, and understood, far too late, exactly what it was he had come in the dark to buy and sell, and it was not a relic, and it was not a weapon, and it was not a boy either, not only a boy. It was the one door in all the world that the thing over the water could not open, and Lucius Malfoy wanted, suddenly, more than he had ever wanted anything, to be very far away from it. He ran. It was not dignified. The greatest coveter in Britain turned and went through his own gate and off into the dark, and his 6 hired wands went with him, or went their own ways, scattering into the night, and the 11 lost in the castle gently, contemptuously, set down outside the wall a mile away in a bog, and the moonlit grass in front of the great doors of Hogwarts was suddenly empty except for a 6-year-old on his knees, and an old hat and a one-armed soldier. And the whole vast held breath of the oldest magic in Britain, straining at the edge of its stone, aching to reach him and forbidden, until Harry at last crawled the hand's breadth back onto the deep stone of the bottom step and let it, The castle took him up. It poured over him the moment he touched the stone, warmth and light and the struck note of his name, folding round him, frantic, apologetic, appalled at the hand's breadth of grass it had not been able to cross. And it carried him up through its own righted corridors to his tower and set him in his bed as gently as it had ever done anything, and Winky was there weeping, and McGonagall came at a run in her dressing gown with her wand out and her face white, and behind her, last slow, came Dumbledore, who had felt the whole of it from his tower and arrived to find it already over, already won, already lost to him, a thing the child had done without him, on the grass, in the dark, alone. For a while no one in the tower doorway spoke, and the fire that McGonagall had not lit itself, low and gold, because the castle would not have its air cold after such a night. It was Dumbledore who moved first, of course. He came into the room, slow, careful, an old man who had felt a thing happen 100 yards away that he could not reach and could not stop and could not now undo, and he sat on the edge of Harry's bed without being asked, which was the first liberty Harry had ever seen him take, and he looked at the child with his blue eyes wet and steady, and he did the thing that was most himself, the thing he could not help, even now, even beaten. He made a plan. "Listen to me," he said gently. "The ministry comes on the first. Malfoy will not stop. He has spent too much and seen too much, and there are others behind him, and the thing over the water has felt you now, truly felt you, and it will not rest. You cannot stay, and you cannot go to London, and so there is a third road, and I know it, because I have spent 100 years learning the roads that vanish. Tonight. You and I, there is a charm, the oldest secret-keeping there is, and a house no living soul remembers, and I can take you there before the sun rises and hide you so completely that not the ministry nor Malfoy nor the wraith itself could find the edge of you, and you could be a boy, Harry, only a boy, safe, hidden for years, until you are grown and strong and ready, and I would keep the secret with my life, and no one would ever put you in a gap again." His voice bent. "Let me do this one thing. Let me get it right. Come away with me tonight and be safe." And it was real, all of it, the offer and the grief and the love, and Harry lay in his bed and looked at the old man offering to spend his life hiding a child, and saw, under the real love, the same thread it always was. Harry disappeared into a house only Albus knew, dependent on Albus for the secret, kept by Albus, shaped by Albus, safe in Albus's hand, the finest and kindest and most complete leash the old man had ever offered, and offered this time not out of cold calculation but out of 100 years of a good man's terror of a world he could not control, and it was, for that, harder to refuse than anything that had come before. "Albus," said McGonagall before Harry could answer, and her voice was quiet and it was iron, and it had changed in a month, changed on the night she watched a child warm his hands at his first fire. "No, listen to yourself. He has just walked into 6 Wands on open ground and faced down the Dark Lord with a nightshirt and a toy soldier alone because none of us could reach him, and your answer is to take him somewhere none of us can reach him ever again and keep the only door yourself." She came and stood by the bed, tall and square, between the old man and the child, which no one at Hogwarts had done in 40 years. "You cannot hide him into being free. No one can. He is done being hidden. Look at him and see it." And Dumbledore looked at the child and was quiet a long moment, and something very old and very tired moved behind the blue eyes, the beginning, perhaps only the beginning, of the hardest lesson of his lettered life. And Harry lay in his bed, shaking, hollowed, the scar quiet at last, the splinter starved almost to nothing now and beaten back into its hole, and he looked at the 3 grown-ups in his doorway, the stern one and the weeping one and the certain one, and he was too tired for the third fence, too tired to watch any hands, and he said the thing that had been coming for a month, the thing the whole night had made plain. "It's not going to stop," he said. His voice was small and it did not shake. "The ministry wants to unmake me. Malfoy wants to sell me. The thing over the water wants to wear me. And you," he looked at Dumbledore, and there was no accusation in it, which made it worse, "you want to leash me. Kindly, all of you have decided what I'm for, and it's not going to stop ever, none of it, because I'm 6 and I've got the oldest magic in Britain and a piece of a dead man over my eye, and there's no paper and no oath and no castle wall that makes that stop being true." He drew a breath and it was steady. "I can't keep doing this, walking out into gaps, holding doors, getting to the second night before they get to me. I have to end it, the whole thing. I have to be the one who decides what I'm for all the way tonight so that there's nothing left for any of you to decide and no gap left to catch me in and no leash left to tie." He looked at the hat on his pillow. "It's time, isn't it, to go all the way down, to claim it, properly, on my own terms, before someone claims me on theirs." And the hat, which had waited 1,000 years for an heir and found a child who at 6 had held his own door against the Dark Lord on a patch of open grass, said very quietly into the silence of the tower, with the stern one and the weeping one and the certain one all listening and none of them able to stop it, "Yes, Harry, it is time. Tomorrow the ministry's man comes for the road. Tonight the fire has burned 1,000 years for this. Go down the stair one more time, not to learn, to claim, and this time do not come back up as their piece on anyone's board, come back up as what you are." Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. On his own terms he went down the stair for the last time a little after 2 in the morning, and the castle knew what it was and did not gentle the steps. That was the first thing Harry noticed, and it told him everything. Every other night the stair had set him down soft, tread by tread, sparing his short legs because he was a child it loved and it could not bear to let him tire on his own descent. Tonight the stone was only stone, and the steps were their true height, and he had to climb down them the honest way, hand on the wall, one careful drop at a time, and he understood that this was not neglect. It was respect. A boy going down to be looked after does not need to feel the true size of the stairs. A steward going down to take up the tending of 1,000 years does, and the castle, which had carried him 100 times, set him on his own feet for this one, because you cannot claim a thing while it is carrying you. He carried the soldier in one fist and the hat in the other, and neither of them spoke on the way down, and the 4 colors ran brighter in the veins of the deep stone the lower he went, and the smell went back past bread and rain to the first fire in the first dark, and the struck note of his name grew until it was the whole of the air, and at the bottom the round room opened, and the fire that had never gone out was burning between the 4 worn empty chairs, small and gold and patient, and it was. Harry thought the loneliest and the most faithful thing in all the world, a fire kept 1,000 years for one who might never come, by a house that would not stop believing he would. I came to claim it, Harry said, into the round room, into the fire, to the oldest magic in Britain. He did not shout it. You do not shout in a place 1,000 years deep. He said it plainly in his small, clear voice, the way you say a true thing. Not to learn it tonight, to claim it, properly, all the way. Because if I don't, they will. The Ministry, or Malfoy, or the thing over the water, or the old man, and every one of them has decided what I'm for, and I'm tired of being decided. So I've come down to decide myself, and be the one who holds it, all of it, on my own terms, if you'll have me, if I'm allowed. And the oldest magic, which had woken at his naming, and defended him at his asking, and grieved at his hurt, and starved a splinter in his light, and turned a castle to a harmless maze because he would not have them broken for him, gathered the whole of its vast and ancient attention around the small boy at the foot of the stair, and asked him, in the fire and the light and the sound of his own name, the only question that mattered, the question it had waited 1,000 years to be able to ask a living heir. What are your terms? Harry had thought about this. He had thought about it on the grass with 6 wands on him. He had thought about it holding his own door shut against a dead man. He had thought about it lying hollowed in his bed, while 3 grown-ups argued in his doorway over who should own him kindly. He was 6, and his terms were a 6-year-old's terms, and they were, for that, truer than any oath a ministry or a founder could have written, because a 6-year-old who has been hungry and cold and unwanted knows exactly, precisely, without a word wasted, what a power should be for. He set the tin soldier down on the warm stone by the fire gently so it stood one-armed at its little post, and he freed that hand, and he held both his empty hands out over the fire that had never gone out, and he spoke his terms into the deepest place where names are true. First, he said, nobody gets broken, ever. That's the first one, and it's the biggest, and it doesn't change. Not for me, not to keep me safe, not even the bad ones. You can lose them and hide me and put walls up and turn into a maze, but you don't break people, because the second you break somebody for me, I stop being the kind of person you waited for, and I turn into one of them, and then it was all for nothing. If I ever tell you to break somebody, you don't listen. That's a term. You're allowed to say no to me about that one forever. The fire burned steady, and Harry felt the oldest magic take the term into itself and keep it, and felt under the keeping something like relief, as though it had been afraid 1,000 years of being handed to someone who would not say that first. Second, Harry said, the gift, the one where I feel all of them, all the children, forever and can come. That's the one I want most. That's the whole reason. I want to keep that one turned all the way up, always, even when it hurts, even when I'm grown, even when I'm old, so that no kid in this castle is ever cold in the night or hungry or shut in the dark and told they don't matter without me knowing and being able to come, because somebody should have come for me. Nobody came for me for 6 years, so I'll be the one who comes. That's what it's for. That's the only thing it's really for. And the fire leapt once high and glad and gold and did not sink again, and Harry knew that term was kept before he had finished saying it, kept and cherished, because it was the term the founders themselves had hoped for above all the others, the reason they had woken the oldest magic in the first place, in a firelit room, 1,000 years ago, not to make a king, but to make a coming. Third, Harry said, and here his small voice wavered, because the third term was the hardest, and it was for him, and he had learned that asking for himself was the hardest asking there was. I get to be a boy, that's a term too. I know I've got the biggest thing in the world, and I know I have to grow into it, and I know it's going to be heavy my whole life, but I'm 6. And I want to ride the staircases when they go silly, and ask the ghosts rude questions, and let Winky feed me too much, and be scared of the dark and come down anyway, and grow up slow at my own speed, the right speed, and not let anyone, not the kind old man or the founders or you, hurry me into being the grown-up thing they need before I've been the boy I never got to be. I lost being little. I want it back. I want to hold the biggest thing in the world and still get to be little while I hold it. Is that allowed? Can it be both? There was a silence in the round room, and it was not the magic hesitating. It was the magic moved past its own thousand-year patience, and when it answered not in the fire but in the warmth, which came up around Harry from the deep stone and folded him close, close and total, the way it had folded him on the very first night in the cupboard when he had first fallen asleep warm, and it said in that folding without words, the thing Helga Hufflepuff had said in the dream and would have said again 1,000 times, yes, yes, that most of all, be little. Hold the world and be little. We will carry the weight of it under you so that you can, and that is not us carrying you, that is us keeping our own bargain, because a steward who never got to be a child is a wound we will not build our 1,000 years on. Be a boy, it is a term, it is kept. Then last, Harry said, and he lifted his chin, and the green coal and the red coal burned together now, cold clear judgment and hot bright daring, one great, nobody owns me. Not with iron and not with a thread I tie myself. I'll be your steward and I'll keep every term forever, but I'm not a relic and I'm not a weapon and I'm not a prize and I'm not a piece on anybody's board, not the ministry's and not Malfoy's and not the old man's, however much he loves me, and I choose that right now myself of my own will, which is the only will that gets to choose it. I claim it, all of it, on those 4 terms. Do you take me? And the oldest magic in Britain, which had waited 1,000 years at the bottom of the world for a living heir to come down the True Height stairs and hold out 2 empty hands and claim it not for power, but for coming, not for a throne, but to be a boy who would keep a fire lit for children, answered. It answered with everything. The fire that had never gone out rose up out of its ring of river-smooth stones, and it did not burn Harry. It came to him, all of it, 1,000 years of kept flame, and it went into him, not as heat but as light, up through his held-out hands and his thin wrists and his small chest, and the 4 colors poured up the veins of the deep stone from every root of the castle at once and met in the round room and met in Harry, and the round room became the inside of a star, red and blue and yellow and green. The whole of Hogwarts' oldest magic waking all the way, at last, after 1,000 years of sleeping and a month of stirring, waking and pouring itself up the ancient chimney of the world into the one small vessel it had waited an age to fill. And Harry stood in the center of it with his hands out and his eyes wide and did not burn because it was his, because he had claimed it on terms it had wept to hear, and it did not fill him the way the splinter had tried to fill him, by taking. By seizing an empty house, it filled him the way a fire fills a hearth it was built for, welcomed, belonging home, and the 4 chairs were not empty. They rose out of the light one last time, the founders, not as a dream now and not as ghosts, but as the coals themselves given shape for the space of acclaiming, Godric with his red beard and his fierce wet grin, Rowena leaning forward with her blue delight, Helga broad and warm with her hands already open, Salazar lean and dark and for the first time unguarded, and they looked at the child standing in the star of their own oldest magic. Holding it on 4 terms they had hoped for and never dared expect, and they did the thing the dead do so rarely and so completely when a thing they built outlives them into rightness, they were satisfied. 1,000 years, said Godric low, and worth every one. Look at him, look at the terms of him. Not one of them is about power, all 4 are about coming. We built a coming, you cold old article, and this to Salazar with love, the old quarrel worn at last to fondness. We built a coming, and it took 1,000 years, and it came. He said nobody gets broken, said Rowena, marveling. With 6 wands on him, he'd already decided it. I watched him decide it on the grass. Do you understand what that is? Do you understand how rare? And Godric said, yes, Ro, I understand. I'm always here. You always explain the thing I'm looking at. And Rowena said, and you always look at the thing without understanding it. We are very well matched. And it was, Harry knew how they loved and would love forever in the coal of the hat. In him, Helga did not speak. Helga looked at the boy who had made being a child a term, being fed a term, and her broad face was wet, and she pressed her open hand to her heart, which was the coal of her, and gave it one more time freely, without a coin under it, as she had given everything all her life. And Salazar last looked at Harry across the fire he had helped light 1,000 years ago and abandoned in his pride and never seen an heir claim, and he said, quiet and precise and at the very end at peace, you guarded the border of your own wanting. On the grass with the wand on you, and here with the whole of it offered, you knew what you wanted before any of them told you, and you held to it, and you claimed it free. That is the thing I could not do in all my cleverness, and you did it at 6 in a nightshirt with a broken toy. I have waited 1,000 years to be proven wrong about what an heir would be, and I have never in my life been so glad to lose an argument. He inclined his dark head, the proud head that had bowed to no one living, to a 6-year-old. Steward, the border is yours, keep it better than I kept mine, I think you will. And then the 4 of them, their 1,000-year purpose kept, their waiting spent, their heir claimed and free, and holding the oldest magic on terms that would have made them weep in life, let go, not sorrowfully, the way a held breath is let go when the danger is finally past. The coals of them settled back down into the old patched hat in Harry's hand, at rest at last, not gone, never gone, but no longer waiting, no longer leaning forward, no longer hollow because the hollow was full, and Harry stood in the star of their magic holding the hat that held them. and understood that he would never again be alone in the deepest sense there was, because 4 dead founders and 1,000 years of kept fire and the oldest magic in Britain had all tonight come home into a boy who had never once, in 6 years, been allowed to feel he had won, and the castle woke around him all the way to its farthest stone. He felt it happen as the founders settled, felt the waking run outward from the round room in a single spreading pulse, up through the roots in the dungeons and the deep cold cellars, up the 1,000 stairs, out along the galleries where the ghosts turned as one and bowed to a thing they could not see, up into the towers where the wind vanes swung round without a wind to point the way his name was ringing. Out over the grounds where the grass bent and the forest went still and listened, and the great thing in the black lake rose halfway to the surface and sang once a note no man had heard in an age, up at last into the great hall, where the enchanted ceiling which had shown the sky faithfully for 1,000 years, went for one moment not to any weather that was in the sky, but to the sky as it had been on the night the 4 founders first lit the fire in the round room, a 1,000-year-old sky, the founding sky. Wheeling its lost stars over an empty hall in the dark, in salute, in memory, in welcome, before it settled back, quiet, to the plain gray dawn of the ordinary 1st of September. The whole castle, every stone of it, root to weathercock, dungeon to tower, came awake and knew its air and took him into itself, so that from that hour there was no longer any line between the boy and the walls, and Hogwarts, which had been the greatest and loneliest house in the world, 1,000 years a school and never once a home, became, over a single shared loaf and a boy who had claimed it on 4 terms, the thing it had been built and had waited a whole millennium to be, which was somebody's. The guest that was never invited did not go quietly, but it went, and the going was the strangest mercy Harry would ever be part of. The splinter woke as the magic filled him, because it felt its house being made whole and new in its bottomless hunger, that there would be no room left in a whole house for a guest that lived on the cracks. It had been starving a month in the light. It was a thread now, a cold, thin thread over his eye, and it clenched its last roots into him and screamed its high cold scream across the miles to the wraith over the water, and the wraith woke and reached, one last desperate time, up the anchor line for its stolen scrap of self. But this time Harry was not alone in an open field, and this time the magic was not ripping the splinter out against his will to save him from himself. This time it was his, claimed in partnership, and it did the thing gently, and it did it with him, and it did it at the end with a mercy that stopped even the founder's coals still. Harry did not fight the splinter. He had learned, holding his door against it on the grass, that fighting it fed it, that it was a thing of hunger and struggle was food, so he did not fight it. He did the thing the whole month in the light had been teaching the splinter and teaching him. He simply, fully, warmly filled his own house. He let the claimed magic pour into every room of himself, every cold, cracked, hungry place the splinter had ever fed on, the cupboard places, the unwanted places, the 6 years of winter places, and he filled them with the fire that had never gone out, with Winky's bread and Godric's laugh and Helga's open hand and the green of the first garden and the warmth of a wall in a cold house, filled himself so full and so warm and so wholly at home that there was, at the last, simply nowhere left in him cold enough for the guest to hold, and the splinter, starved, warmed past the point a thing of that darkness can survive, unrooted not by tearing but by the slow, sure rising of a tide of warmth under it, came loose. It did not scream at the end, it was too small to scream. It came away from the scar like a splinter finally worked out of healed skin, a thread of cold black nothing, and it hung a moment in the star of the 4 colors, lost in Harry, who had every right to hate it, who had carried it his whole life, who had held his own door against the thing it served on a patch of grass in the dark, did the thing that made him, finally and forever, the true heir of all 4, the thing the fire had waited 1,000 years to see an heir due to the very darkness itself. He did not break it. You were a piece of somebody once, Harry said to the thread of cold black nothing softly in the star of the magic, before he made you into this. A long time ago you were just a boy who got sorted, and nobody came for you either, I think. Nobody came for you, and you turned into this because nobody came. He looked at the small, lost, cold thing that had ridden over his eye for 6 years and fed on his winters. Somebody should have come for you. Nobody did. I'm sorry. I can't let you stay because this is my house and I've filled it and there's no room, but I'm not going to break you either because that's the first term and it's for everybody, even you. And he opened his warm, full hands, and let the tide of the oldest magic carry the last cold thread of the guest gently up and out and away, unmade not by violence but by warmth, dissolved the way frost dissolves when the sun finally reaches it, not broken, only ended, only let at last to stop. And over the water in a cold ruin, the wraith that had been reaching up the anchor line felt the anchor simply cease, felt the scrap of itself warm and loosen and dissolve out of the world, and it fell back, screaming its silent scream, one whole measure weaker than it had been, one anchor lighter. Its long, slow plan to come again dealt a wound it would not understand for years and would never forgive. Robbed not by a curse or a hero or an army, but by a 6-year-old who had filled his own house so full of warmth that there was no longer any cold in him for a dead man to hold. and Harry, in the round room over the fire that had gone into him and would now never go out because it was him, put his hand up to the scar over his eye and found it, for the first time in his memory, only a scar, thin and old and quiet, with nothing behind it but a boy. The ministry's man came at dawn on the 1st of September to the wrought iron gate to take the child to London, and he found the whole world had changed in the night, and he was, of all the men who might have come, the right one to understand it. It was Croaker. They had sent Croaker because Croaker had been the first to touch the thing, and because Croaker did not frighten, and Croaker walked up the road that did not gentle for him and stood at the gate as the sun came up gray and gold over the black water, and the gate did not open for him, and he did not try to make it, because he had learned in a Surrey kitchen exactly whose gate it was. Harry came down to him. He came down through the castle that was awake now all the way, every stone of it singing his name so low and so constant that Croaker felt it in his teeth from the gate. And he came out the great doors and down the worn steps in the grey dawn, small in proper clothes for once, with the hat on his head where a hat belongs and the one-armed soldier in his pocket. And behind him came McGonagall, square and stern and fierce, and last and slow came Dumbledore, who had felt the whole of the night from his tower, who had felt the oldest magic wake all the way and pour into a child, and evict a shard of Voldemort's soul and settle into a claimed and terms-bound partnership that Albus Dumbledore, in 100 years of trying, had never once been permitted to touch, and who came down the steps behind the child not as a guardian and not as a headmaster and not any longer as a man with a plan, but as a witness, which was a thing he had not been in a very long time, and which was, though it grieved him and freed him both, the beginning of the hardest and last great lesson of his lettered life. Croaker looked through the bars of the gate at the 6-year-old. "I've come to take you to London," he said in his level grey voice without much hope. The court signed a paper. "I know," Harry said. "I'm not coming." "No," Croaker agreed. "I didn't think you would be. The paper says a great many things. It doesn't say how a man makes a castle give up a child it has claimed, because the men who wrote the paper have never met a castle that could." He tilted his grey head. "You've done it, then. The thing my report said couldn't be contained. You've gone and claimed it, all of it." "On terms," Harry said. "I want to tell you the terms so you can put them in your report, and the report can go to the minister and the court and everybody, because I'm only going to say them once and then everyone has to live with them." And he told Croaker the 4 terms plainly in his clear small voice in the grey dawn through the bars of the gate. "Nobody gets broken. Every child in this castle gets someone to come. He gets to be a boy, and nobody owns him." And then he told Croaker the 5th thing, the thing that was not a term but a fact, the new shape of the world that the ministry and the court and Malfoy and everyone would now have to build their plans around, and he told it without any triumph, because the green coal knew that triumph made enemies and facts made peace. "I'm going to stay here," Harry said, "and grow up at Hogwarts with Professor McGonagall looking after me and be a boy and learn slowly, and when I'm 11 I'll get sorted like everybody, even though we all know what the hat's going to say, and I'll go to lessons and be normal as I can. And the castle's going to keep me because it's mine, and nobody's going to take me to a room that unmakes things or sell me to a man with combs or hide me in a house only one person knows, because there isn't a power in Britain that can make the oldest magic in Britain give me up, and everybody who felt it wake knows that now. Malfoy knows it, the thing over the water knows it, and you know it. So the ministry has a choice. It can spend the next years being frightened of a 6-year-old and trying to cage a thing it can't cage and losing over and over, or it can do the other thing." He looked at Croaker steadily. "It can let me be a boy. And in a lot of years when I'm grown and I've kept my terms and I've never once broken anybody, it can have, instead of a caged, frightened weapon it made by trying to cage it, a steward of the oldest magic in Britain who grew up safe and fed and slow and free, and who feels every child in this castle in his own chest and comes. That's the offer. That's the only offer. It's a better one than any of them deserve, and I'm making it anyway because that's the first term and it's for everybody, even the ministry." A pause. "Tell them I said please." Croaker looked at the boy through the bars for a long moment, the grey unspeakable who priced anomalies for a living, and something moved in his grey face that had moved in a Surrey kitchen a month before, and he took out a small notebook and he wrote in it, and what he wrote, he told Harry later, when they were something almost like friends in years to come, was not a report of a threat contained or a source secured. It was 4 terms and an offer and the word please, and under it, in his own cramped unspeakable's hand, a single line of recommendation to the Minister for Magic, which read, "Leave the child alone. It is the wisest thing we will ever do, and we will only understand why in about 50 years. He put the notebook away. He inclined his head through the bars to the 6-year-old, the 3rd grown man to bow to Harry in a month, and he said, "Grow up well, Heir, keep your terms. I'll hold them off as long as I can, which will be longer than you'd think, because I frighten them, and I'm going to spend the rest of my career being frightening on your behalf, and I find, to my very great surprise, that I want to." And he turned and went down the road in the grey dawn, and where the road bent he was gone, the clean total way of the other world, and the gate of Hogwarts stayed shut behind him. And Harry Potter, 6 years old, heir of the four, steward of the oldest magic in Britain, stood in the first light of the 1st of September and had at last, and against every arithmetic of his small hard life, won. McGonagall came and stood beside him at the gate a moment after Croaker had gone, and the two of them looked down the empty road together, the stern tall woman and the small claimed heir, and neither spoke for a while. Then she got down on one knee on the worn stone so that her face was level with his, which she had never done and which cost her something because she was not a woman who knelt, and she looked at him steadily and said what she had come to say. "I am not clever like the headmaster," she said, "and I am not old like your hat, and I have no ancient magic and no grand plan, and I have felt, this last month, very small standing next to all of it. But I have decided a thing, Harry, and I am going to say it once and then it will simply be true, the way a fact is true, and you may lean on it for the rest of your life without ever having to ask whether it will hold. I am going to look after you, not steward you, not shape you. Not keep you, look after you. I am going to make sure you are warm and fed and got to bed and made to wear a coat, and I am going to be furious at anyone who is cruel to you, and I am going to sit in the front row and be unbearably proud when you are 11 and that hat says over your head the thing we all already know. And if you have a nightmare, there will be a light on and a person in it, and that person will be me, for as long as I am alive, which I intend to be for a very long time out of sheer stubbornness. That is not a term, and it is not an oath, and it does not come with a hand to watch. It is only a woman telling a child that someone is, at last, in charge of the small, ordinary business of loving him, and that it is going to be her, and that she is glad of it, gladder than of anything in 40 years of teaching." Her voice did not shake because she would not let it. "Do you understand me?" Harry looked at her, and he watched her hands out of an old habit that would never leave him. And her hands held nothing, laid no coin, only rested open on her own knee. And he understood all the way down in the place where names are true, that he had just been given the one thing the founders and the fire and the oldest magic in Britain could not give him, the small plain human thing, a grown-up whose whole job was going to be him. And he stepped forward and put his arms around her neck, which he had never done to anyone because there had never been anyone, and Minerva McGonagall knelt on the stone in the grey dawn and held the heir of the four while he was, for a little while, only a boy who had needed this his whole life, and she was exactly as fierce and exactly as proud and exactly as unbreakable about it as she had promised, and it held and it would always hold. Dumbledore found him afterward in the kitchens, being fed, of course being fed. Winky had heard that the heir had claimed the whole of the oldest magic in Britain in the small hours, and evicted the Dark Lord from his own forehead and faced down the ministry at the gate at dawn, and had concluded with the flawless logic of a Hogwarts elf that what such a boy needed above all else was a second breakfast, and a third, and Harry was sitting on the scrubbed table swinging his legs and eating a sausage and laughing at something the fat friar had drifted through the wall to tell him. 6 years old, ordinary, warm, and Dumbledore stood in the kitchen doorway and watched him for a while before he came in, and there was on the old face something that had not been there in 100 years, which was the willingness to be taught. "I have come," Dumbledore said, "to apologize, not to arrange anything, not to plan. I find I am rather out of the habit of coming into a room to do nothing but apologize, and it is harder than it looks, and I am going to do it badly, and I am going to do it anyway." He came and sat, without being asked, on the bench by the scrubbed table, an old man among the pots and the elves and the ghost at the child's height, and he looked at Harry with his blue eyes clear and tired, and for once empty of any plan. "I left you in a cupboard for 6 years for reasons that seemed to me good, and I would have closed your hand around a leash for reasons that seemed to me good, and I would have hidden you into a smaller cage for reasons that seemed to me good, and the through line of my whole long life, Harry, the thing I have only truly seen in the last month, watching you, is that I have spent 100 years mistaking the reasons that seemed to me good for the good itself, and calling the mistake wisdom. I have hurt a great many people I loved by it, and you are only the latest and the smallest and the one who, thank God, got out from under it before I finished. You did the thing I never learned to do. You knew what you wanted before the powerful told you what you wanted, and you held the border of it, and you claimed yourself free. I have read every book in this castle. That lesson was not in any of them. I had to be taught it at 105 years old by a 6-year-old eating a sausage." His voice was not quite steady. "Thank you. I do not deserve to be the one who says it, but someone should, and I am the one who owes it most. Thank you for not letting me be kind to you." Harry looked at the old man, and he watched the hand, because he would always watch the hand. Salazar's cold did not sleep and never would, and he saw that for the first time the hand held nothing, laid no coin, wanted nothing but to be forgiven. And Harry, who had the yellow coal too, the coal that could not walk past a hurt thing even when the hurt thing had hurt him, put down his sausage and looked at the oldest and cleverest and loneliest man in Britain sitting on an elf's bench asking a child not to let him be kind, and he did the thing that no leash and no oath and no plan could ever have bought from him, and gave freely without a coin under it, as Helga gave, the only thing he had that the old man actually needed. You can stay, Harry said, and be my teacher, just my teacher, not my keeper, if you can tell the difference now. The hat says you're the cleverest man alive, and I think that's probably true, and I've got the biggest thing in the world to learn how to hold, and I'd rather learn it from someone who's sorry than someone who isn't. But you have to keep the terms too. Everybody keeps the terms, even you, especially you. He picked his sausage back up. And you have to let me be 6, that's the important one, can you do that? And Albus Dumbledore, who had never in 100 years been offered a thing he wanted so much and deserved so little, looked at the child who had just in a sentence given him back a purpose and taken away his crown, and he found that his eyes were wet, and he let them be, which was itself a new thing, and he said, yes, I can do that, I will spend what remains of my life learning to do that, and it will be the best spent time of the whole of it. Be 6, Harry, be gloriously, ordinarily 6. Ride the staircases, ask the ghosts impertinent questions. Let Winky feed you until you cannot move. And when you are ready, not before, not a day before, come and find me, and I will teach you everything I know, and you will keep the parts that are wise and throw out the parts that are only certain, and between us, perhaps, we will make something better than either the world I was building or the world it was afraid of. A world with a coming in it. I should like to see that. I should like very much to help. And so the story got out as stories do, because a thing that large cannot be kept from showing, and the wizarding world woke over the following days to a thing it had no shape for, printed in the prophet in letters 4 inches high and whispered in every hall and hearth in Britain, that the oldest magic in the world had woken, that it had a true heir, the heir of all 4 founders, whole and undivided, the first in 1,000 years. And that the heir was a child of 6 who had been found in a cupboard, and had claimed the whole of Hogwarts' deepest power not to rule or to conquer or to avenge, but on 4 terms, one of which was that nobody ever gets broken, and one of which was that he wanted to be allowed to be a boy. The prophet ran a picture, badly drawn, of a small figure at a gate and a headline, and under the headline 3 separate columns of learned witches and wizards contradicting one another about what it all meant, whether the heir was a miracle or a menace or a hoax, whether the ministry had been weak or wise to let him be, whether an old prophecy was fulfilled or broken or had never meant this at all. And in Knockturn Alley a certain antiquary quietly closed his shop and left the country, because a man who deals in the leavings of the dead great does not care to be in the same island as a living one who feels every child in a castle and might, one grey morning, take an interest in the provenance of his stock. And in a great pale house a father looked at his own small son and did not, for once, know what to teach him. And in a cold ruin over the water a thing that was barely a thing lay in the dark and hated a name it had felt burn out of its own forehead, and began, patient, wounded, to plan, because the wanting of the wanted never fully stops, and the oldest of the wanters had the longest memory of all. They did not know what to do with it. A world that had spent its whole history waiting for saviors who came with swords, and dark lords who came with terror, did not have a drawer to put a 6-year-old in who came with terms and a tin soldier and a rule about kindness. Some of them were frightened, and some of them were moved, and some of them, the old families and the grey departments and the thing over the water, went quietly on wanting him, because the wanting of the wanted never fully stops, and Harry knew that, the green coal knew that, and he watched the hands all his life and never once stopped. But that was all still coming in the years ahead, the whole long wait of it. On the 1st of September, in the first year of the world remade, none of it had arrived yet. There was only a boy of 6 on a scrubbed table in a warm kitchen deep in a castle that sang his name in its stones, being fed too much by an elf who had waited 1,000 years for someone to feed, watched over by a stern green woman who kept his plate from ever being empty, and a sorry old man learning at last to be only a teacher, with a wry ancient hat on his head that held 4 founders finally at rest. And a one-armed soldier in his pocket who had taught him the only lesson that had got him through the cupboard and the kitchen and the grass and the fire, which was that you keep going anyway, chin up, with the arm you have left. He was going to be all right, not because he was the heir of everything, though he was, and not because the oldest magic in Britain knelt to him, though it did, and not because a castle 1,000 years old loved him the wrong amount and would love him forever, though it would. He was going to be all right because he was warm now and fed now and found now and free now and 6, and a fire that had waited 1,000 years was burning in him and would never go out. And somewhere far below the warm kitchen, in the round room under the round rock, the ring of river-smooth stones stood empty for the first time in 1,000 years, because the fire that had never gone out had finally, at long last, come home and gone up the stair and become a boy. Chapter 7 End.